221. Christmas Eve on December 23rd, the bank of clouds that had lingered for half a month finally broke apart, and sunlight that had long been hidden fell onto the snow. The brightness, reflected off the pristine white, was almost blinding. Nearly a week had passed since the basilisk incident. The school board and the Ministry of Magic still hadn't sent anyone to investigate. The matter hadn't become as urgent as Snape had warned. Loren suspected the Crabbe family was pulling strings, looking for a way to clear Vincent Crabbe's name. None of that concerned Loren and his friends at the moment. They were caught up in the growing holiday cheer and eagerly awaiting Christmas. Hogwarts, Hospital Wing. Sunlight streamed through the latticed windows, bathing the whole room. Madame Pomfrey had moved the petrified Colin and Justin to the window so they could feel the long-awaited sun. No one else was in the hospital wing. Loren had tied back the curtain on Hermione's cubicle with a bandage he found, letting the sunlight fall unimpeded across her bed. In the warm, bright light, each fine cat hair glittered like crystal. Hermione was keeping her promise. She reviewed transfiguration points with Loren, forcing him to memorize at her pace. Her curled little paws made it difficult to turn pages, so she used both hands as a bookstand while Loren turned the sheets. They leaned against the headboard, shoulders touching, heads close together, murmuring softly as they discussed notes. Bright, warm sunlight filled the room. The only sounds in the quiet hospital wing were the occasional rustle of pages and their low voices after long pauses. Even with no one around, they instinctively kept their tones down. The sun was warm, and whether it was the polyjuice potion or something else, Hermione's eyelids grew heavy after a while. On a stormy night, the mixture in the crystal vial will turn blood red. Loren read softly. Then he felt the weight of a small head against his shoulder. Fluffy cat ears brushed his cheek, and it tickled. As Hermione's breathing deepened, Loren reached out and gently nudged her. "Hey, we're studying. How did you fall asleep?" Hermione made a faint, lazy purring sound, already drowsy. "How can you sleep while studying?" Loren protested as he shifted. "Don't move," Hermione grumbled, half asleep, not really awake. The sunlight and the soft padding made sleep irresistible. "That's just how cats are," she mumbled and settled her head back on Loren's shoulder, drifting off under the warm sun. For some reason, Loren suddenly felt very content, like the sunlight itself. The scene seemed perfectly suited to sleep. He eased himself back against the bed, tugged the quilt up a little, and let himself doze beside her in the bright afternoon. At some later, indeterminate time, Loren woke first. The golden daylight had begun to yellow, its edge softened as the sun slipped toward the western hills. Hermione's breathing remained long and even. A soft snore escaped from her throat. After watching her for a while, Loren saw her eyelashes flutter, but she didn't open her eyes. A wash of embarrassment at that thought hit him. Hermione had offered to supervise his revision and ended up dozing off first. He imagined her scolding him later. Hermione felt his gaze and, pretending to be asleep, kept her eyes closed in the hope that when he left she'd wake and it would be as if nothing had happened. Loren watched the change in her breathing and smiled silently. He didn't notice at first the fluffy little tail restlessly poking out from under the quilt, swinging and wagging beside the bed. "Are cats and tails really two different creatures? I need to research this," he muttered to himself, making an excuse. He reached out and pinched the long tail gently. Despite the fluffy fur, it was surprisingly thin underneath, soft but not particularly strong. He twisted it lightly. The tail suddenly stiffened and slipped from his hand as its sleek fur slid away. Loren, distracted, grabbed it again and pulled it back. In an instant, it slipped free once more. Realizing something was wrong, he turned to Hermione. She had opened her eyes without his noticing, big, round, unblinking, filled with confusion. Then she tilted her head and deliberately nudged the tail into his palm, making it curl against his hand. Loren stroked from the middle of the tail to the tip. Hermione remained silent. He pretended ignorance and continued, lowering his head to play with the small tail seriously. They went on like that until the platinum sunlight reddened and the western sky bloomed in crimson, painting the branches of the forbidden forest. Finally, Hermione pushed him away with a grimace and withdrew her tail beneath the quilt. "The school allows pets," she said. "You can go to Diagon Alley and buy a cat. We saw some before. Loren stood and stretched with a big yawn, loosening the stiffness from sleep as he looked out at the setting sun. Are you really not going to the Christmas feast? He asked, sitting down again as if he'd never been distracted, moving on to the next topic. Compared to a week earlier, Hermione's fur had lessened a lot, but it certainly wouldn't be gone by the feast. He tried to change the subject clumsily. Hermione rolled her eyes and snapped. It depends. If the cat features aren't too obvious, I can wear a hooded robe. You'll be fine, Loren said. Definitely. Humph. Night fell as the sun set. Outside the school, the adult wizarding world observed Christmas with a slightly later start and shorter holiday. Within the Ministry of Magic, people from every department handed over tasks to those on holiday duty. Faces lit up with gleaming smiles as colleagues wished each other well. Every ministry employee, from senior officials to lowly clerks, had received an invitation to the Malfoy Manor feast. Those left on duty couldn't attend the banquet, but Mr. Malfoy had sent exquisite Christmas gift boxes. Everyone praised Lucius Malfoy's generosity. Barty Crouch finished his day. Though tired, his short gray hair remained neat and his image as head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation unmarred. After he handed over his work, he headed for home. The gold lift door sighed open, and Dolores Umbridge stepped in, all pink dress and matching hair clip, a girlish smile plastered on her face. Crouch's brow tightened. He had mastered merpeople, gobbledygook, troll, some 200 languages, but he still didn't know what to say to this woman. Before he could speak, Umbridge pressed the button for his floor and chirped in a high, sugary voice, "Mr. Crouch, Merry Christmas in advance." Crouch inclined his head. "You too." As the lift fell into silence, Umbridge asked, "Sir, I heard you declined Mr. Malfoy's dinner invitation. Why is that?" She continued in the same saccharine tone. "I checked the duty roster. You aren't listed as staying behind. Your wife died years ago, and your son. Ha! I'm very curious why you'd refuse Mr. Malfoy's dinner." Crouch's jaw clenched, and the veins at his temples throbbed. He let his hands fall and answered coldly, "I simply wanted more time to rest. The International Magical Cooperation Department already has enough social engagements in the best of times." "And why are you staying?" he countered. "Madam Umbridge, why did you volunteer to stay on duty instead of accepting Mr. Malfoy's invitation?" Umbridge's laugh, sharp and high, grated in the confined lift. "Of course not. I thought if I volunteered to stay, another colleague could have their holiday and enjoy family time." Her words were full of self-satisfaction. Fresh from championing the anti-werewolf legislation, she had gained influence among senior ministry officials and was angling for the senior undersecretary post. This display of imagined benevolence was meant to smooth the path to promotion. "I've always been such a considerate colleague," she added, oozing insincerity. The lift chimed and the doors opened. Crouch quickly stepped out. Umbridge followed, apparently eager to add something, but Crouch hustled away toward the hall. He spotted Arthur Weasley waiting alone and seized the opportunity. "Thank Merlin," Crouch muttered under his breath, then approached warmly. "Arthur Weasley, off early? Must be a lively Christmas for you." Arthur, who had just finished his day at the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office, was slightly taken aback by the familiarity. But the Weasleys were known at the ministry as a large, cheerful family, and he smiled back. "Oh, we'll be visiting Bill in Egypt this year. The other children will stay at Hogwarts for Christmas. They'll probably be having a great time at school." Crouch recalled the incident with Vincent Crabbe, not his business, but he had heard about it. Getting Umbridge out of his way was his immediate priority, so he said with concern, "Something's happened at Hogwarts recently. You might want to bring the children home." Arthur chuckled and trusted Dumbledore. "Don't forget, Dumbledore is headmaster. It's safer at the school than anywhere else." "When are you leaving?" Crouch asked. "First thing tomorrow morning." "Have your travel papers been sorted? All taken care of a week ago." They walked on, talking quietly. Umbridge watched them go, her face darkening, then smoothed into a relieved smile. Attitude and sentiment didn't matter. Power did. Far from these mundane politicking and banquets, Malfoy Manor glittered that night in Wiltshire. Hundreds of candles, taller than a person, floated in the air, throwing lavish light over long tables piled with food. The scent of wine and roast drifted through the ballroom, where guests danced and toasted. Vila dancers, the Weird Sisters, Quidditch players. Lucius Malfoy had spared no expense in showcasing his house's wealth. On a remote island, however, a very different scene played out. Azkaban's cold blackness covered the sea. In a special cell, sealed with a fine mesh and sometimes bristling with electric currents, Peter Pettigrew lay motionless on the floor, swollen and bruised. His beard and hair looked chewed away, clear shoe prints marked his scalp. The door opened, and a cloaked figure slid in, smelling of stagnant water and rot. The Dementor had arrived again. Pettigrew shuddered. He trembled, fighting the instinct to slip into his animagus form and hide as a mouse, but he had learned the hard way that if he tried to avoid a Dementor that way, the guards would beat him. The scars that mapped his body were testament to that. After nearly a year of this, he had learned how to survive. Barely. The Dementor sucked at him, draining the warm, happy memories from his mind. Just before he blacked out, his body began to twist and shrink into the mouse form, paws missing toes, fur matted. The memories that clung most often were those of pranks and laughter with Prongs and the others, memories that now felt like barbs. Pettigrew thought of them with a hollow ache before collapsing into unconsciousness. The food that had been left in the cell vanished abruptly. The Dementor paused, as if something in its consciousness misfired, then drifted away puzzled and left. Shortly after, a man in a sharp suit stepped in, stayed less than a minute, and left with an expression of disgust. Opportunities here were rare. His movements were quick. A young wizard guard waiting outside stepped forward, unaware of his superior's subtle gesture concerning a pocket. He smiled ingratiatingly. "Don't worry, Deputy Head. Mr. Moody specifically told us to watch him closely." The deputy head of the prison department bristled. Moody. Never mind that he's retired. When did someone from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement start running Azkaban? Or do you want to go and be an Auror with him?" The young guard blinked, confused by the outburst, and quickly lowered his head. Being an Auror wasn't as comfortable as loafing in Azkaban, so he muttered, "Sorry, sir." The deputy head's tone softened. "Don't do anything unnecessary in future. As long as that mouse is in the ward, even if he dies, there's no need to fuss. He's you-know-who's henchman, who knows what trouble he's been part of." "You're right, sir. We won't do anything unnecessary." The deputy head nodded, then in a shift of tone, asked, "If I'm not mistaken, you're getting married next year, yes? Why aren't you spending Christmas with your fiancée?" The young guard scratched his head. "I'm trying to save for our honeymoon." "The Avery girl, right? Ha 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 ha!" The deputy head chuckled. The festive mood rose like a tide elsewhere, and no one in the revelry noticed that the injured mouse in the special Azkaban cell had new wounds on its front paws, and that its fur somehow looked much cleaner than before. 222. A few things about the banquet. Malfoy Manor was bright as day, though it was nearing midnight. Music and bonfires spilled into the snowy night. The courtyard glittered with light and warmth despite the soft fall of snow. Guests gathered in small clusters, talking about everything from evening gowns and scarf colors to petitions for entry to the American Magical Congress and wagers on Quidditch matches. In one corner, a circle of men who had once been Death Eaters huddled together. They had escaped prosecution, and despite old rivalries and mutual distrust, they shared a cautious camaraderie born of identical sins. When the conversation turned to the bluntness of the Americans, Flint, a well-informed pureblood, raised his goblet and jabbed at the burly man nearby. "I heard your boy's in ministry custody," he said with a leer. Headmaster Dumbledore handed him in for tampering with a basilisk and endangering Muggle students. "Lucky for you, this is Britain. If it were the American Magical Congress, he'd be dead already." The assembled purebloods laughed. Old Crabbe's face darkened. A middle-aged Rosier put a hand on his shoulder to soothe him. "It's Christmas," the Rosier laughed. "Don't brood. Spend some money. He'll be out before the holiday's over." Old Crabbe's bulk filled his loose shirt. His grin never came. He looked across the crowd toward Fudge and muttered, "We've already paid for the last werewolf mess. That idiot Vincent, he'll get himself killed in Azkaban." Everyone present knew Vincent was his only son. No one believed Crabbe would let the ministry keep him locked up. Flint, sensing the shift to confidential talk, edged closer until they formed a tighter ring. He lowered his voice and passed on what he'd picked up. Dumbledore himself handed Vincent over, and Moody's involved in the case. A lot of people are watching. Money may not be enough. Crabbe's features pinched, his skin folding into a fierce snarl. The men around him felt the sudden threat in his air. Flint glanced again toward Fudge and said in the same low tone, "Forget the legalities. Get him out of the ministry, then send him abroad. Identities can be changed. France, the States, easy enough." "Dumbledore's getting old," one murmured. "His influence isn't what it was. He can't reach everywhere anymore," another added. No one really cared whether Vincent had actually broken the law or endangered Muggle pupils. Most of them had dark artifacts and secrets they preferred not to see unearthed. The Rosier lowered his voice still further. "There's talk in the ministry that when Dumbledore handed Vincent over, he suggested the whole thing was tied to you-know-who." At the name, the Rosier brushed the outside of his forearm with his goblet, indicating the place of the black mark. Faces snapped to serious, instinctive caution. Fear hummed beneath their veiled suspicion. Fear of the Dark Lord, if he were indeed returning. They avoided looking at Crabbe too long. He had been the first to encounter the Dark Lord, and might then be the one to attract retribution if the old power rose again. Crabbe himself shrank from the thought. "I didn't see you-know-who," he said slowly. "Maybe Vincent was bewitched by some old dark object, some lingering spirit. He was just fooled." "Is the spirit tied to you-know-who?" Flint pressed. "No," Crabbe insisted. "It's just Vincent being bewitched." Relief spread through the circle. Flint drained his goblet and laughed, regaining his airs of a pure-blood gentleman. "Of course. Hogwarts is ancient. You find cursed things in old castles all the time. The ministry ought to be searching Hogwarts first thing." "Exactly," came the chorus, smiles pasted on. They listened with one ear to Crabbe's version and held their own calculations with the other. Their lives had depended on cunning, otherwise they'd have been in Azkaban long ago. The Rosier scoffed. "Dumbledore's using this as an excuse to grab power. If you-know-whose name gets tossed around, who else but Dumbledore could oppose him? It'll be his ticket to the ministry." "Such a clumsy scheme," someone said. "For a wizard whose magic is great, his tricks are awfully crude," another added. Picking up a tray from a passing villa waiter, Flint sipped and adopted the leisurely pose of a noble. "It's simple. Vincent must be under a dark curse. Innocent, of course." They all smiled, that half-smile used by people pleading innocence. "I was under Imperio. I was threatened. I was compelled." Excuses that had saved many a guilty shred of pride. Crabbe's expression eased, and he began to ask about methods to save his son, as the men offered suggestions in a half-joking, half-practical tone. Smuggling, new papers, foreign refuge. Away from the chatter and the glittering pavilion, in a dim service corridor, a trembling house elf crept along the shadows with a platter of steaming food. Dobby kept his head low, desperate to be invisible. If he could, he would have stayed in the kitchens forever. He had to make the deliveries, though, and then vanish. A large gloved hand closed around his neck. "It's you, after all." Sirius Black's grip was hard, but motioned them out of sight and into a private room. His black robes swallowed Dobby in their folds as he hauled him along. Black's eyes were deep-set and dangerous, and his presence made the little elf quake. Malfoy had invited most of the pureblood houses. As the last of the old Black line and a relative of Narcissa, Sirius had been welcomed. He had spent the term investigating, finding nothing of use until now. Dobby, sweating, filthy, and terrified in a side room. Sirius grinned, yellow teeth showing. He liked a gift with a story. "Do you know me?" he asked, voice low. Dobby's knees bent. Yes, Mr. Black. Master Narcissa's cousin," he stammered. "Not honest enough," Sirius snapped. "You explain everything clearly, or I take you to Malfoy and explain to your master. She'll love the idea of chopping your head off. You'd be delighted, eh?" No, Dobby doesn't want. Dobby wants to live," the elf wailed. Sirius loosened his grip. He didn't think Dobby could run. His master was here at the manor. "Yes, Dobby knows. You are Mr. Harry Potter's godfather." Sirius's questions came faster, angrier. "Why did you intercept Harry's letters last summer? Why did you stop him returning to school? Did you know about the Chamber of Secrets and the Basilisk?" At the mention of summer, Dobby collapsed into a frenzy. He beat his own head, shrieking, tears and snot mingling with blood as the sharp impact split skin. Dobby can't say. Dobby can't say. Dobby is a bad elf. Dobby is a bad elf. He pummeled his skull until dark, sticky blood ran down his face. Sirius watched with disgust and controlled impatience. The elf's behavior reminded him of Creature at Grimmauld Place. Madness when a house elf betrays its master. He waited until the self-harm subsided. Be quiet, he barked at last. Stay here. He left the elf in the room and returned a moment later with Narcissa Malfoy, resplendent in a luxurious gown. Sirius, the white peacock is about to spread its tail. What is this, then? She chided, though her annoyance was mild. Tonight she was in a good mood. The manor was full. The ministry's important men were present. Lucius was conversing comfortably with Minister Fudge. Sirius indicated the whining, bleeding Dobby on the floor. I want to buy this house elf from you. Grimmauld Place hasn't been cleaned in years. I'd like him there. Narcissa recoiled at the filthy elf. The Black family has house elves, don't they? If they died, they couldn't have escaped, could they? She asked tightly. Sirius supplied the name. Creature's too old to move. He begs to be killed the whole day. I want to renovate the house, sort the jewelry and antiques. House elves could be bought or traded with enough money. Narcissa hesitated. A black, wailing elf on her carpets did not suit her. Dobby's sobs left dark stains on the carpet. Sirius, seeing her reluctance soften, reached into his pocket and offered a sum that made her think of the last few months' expenses. Donations to the ministry, hush payments to Fudge, a big contribution to St. Mungo's, tonight's banquet costs. The amount made Narcissa's mouth twitch into a practiced smile. She bowed her head slightly. I'll discuss it with Lucius, but the elf will need to stay out of sight for the rest of the evening. Of course. Sirius's grin returned. They walked out together, scarcely glancing back at the collapsing, cuffed elf. As they moved away, Sirius spoke casually. Any plans for the future, Narcissa? For now, nothing special, she said. If I were you, I'd find a pure-blood girl to marry soon and have children. The black line can't die out. Narcissa laughed faintly at the reminder of obligations and pedigrees. Sirius went on in an offhand tone. Look at the Weasleys. They're open about not caring for bloodlines, but they had so many children, didn't they? Don't be like Andromeda. She married a muggle and had a daughter, Nymphadora Tonks. 223. Christmas Gift. Hogwarts was just as lively on Christmas Eve. Hermione hadn't been discharged from the hospital wing yet, and since no one cared what Percy thought, there was no need to worry about disturbing anyone. The Weasley children were having a blast playing Exploding Snap with Harry. The common room was punctuated by a steady series of pops and sparks. After another blast, Harry rubbed his right hand, numb from the shock, and felt he'd had enough, wishing someone else would take over. He looked around but couldn't see anyone. He turned to Ron, who was shuffling cards. Where's Loren? I haven't seen him since dinner. Who knows? Probably with Hermione, Ron said, distracted. He had a good hand and was focused on blowing George and Fred into smithereens. Ginny stood behind Harry, peering at the cards in his hand with a soft sigh. Unaware of the conversation, Loren was busy in the room of requirement. He had first cut basilisk scales into palm-sized plates, then used sectum sempra to engrave the grooves of the magical array along preset trajectories. Finally, he activated a strand of unicorn hair and embedded it so the strand, full of pure magic, sat in the grooves. This was the alchemical array engraving method Loren had recently optimized, inspired by Professor Snape. When Snape had demonstrated how to dismember the basilisk, he'd shown an unusual way of controlling sectum sempra. He could guide the spell's blade to follow a prearranged path. Practicing that technique had given Loren the idea to apply it to alchemy. By using sectum sempra to carve the array grooves first, and then embedding activated unicorn hair, he could complete an array with much greater precision and fault tolerance. Normally, when one activates unicorn hair with a wand to carve an array, it's like performing high-precision surgery. Any hesitation, tremor, uneven speed, or fluctuation in magical input can ruin the engraving and force a complete restart. Loren's method added a pre-processing step, cutting the pattern with sectum sempra, so small mistakes could be corrected before the hair was activated. In fact, as long as the unicorn hair ended up embedded along the correct pattern, earlier carving errors didn't matter. He had more unicorn hair left on his wand, and for the carrier material, he had naturally chosen basilisk scales. On a palm-sized scale, he engraved a hexagram array base. Less than half of the silver strand remained, the rest of the hair still faintly glowed with rich magic. A clever idea, the projection of Flamel hovered nearby, examining the engraving as it floated in midair. He admired it, but hesitated. It's just what? Loren didn't look up. He drew another set of magical runes on the scale, as if his wand were a calligraphy brush and the flowing unicorn hair was the ink. I still think that improving your raw control over magic and developing precision in array engraving is the proper training path for an alchemist. A second set of runes was finished. A third of the silver thread at the wand tip remained. Loren held his breath and in a single motion finished the third set of runes. When the last stroke gleamed into place, the 3 sets shimmered faintly. Success. The unfilled engravings on the scale extended, linking into a hole. The space within the grooves expanded continuously, suitcase size, then the size of a lavatory stall, and finally stopped at the size of a classroom. The scale itself showed no sign of change. Loren nodded with satisfaction. It was his first time engraving an undetectable extension charm array using only a single strand of unicorn hair. You're right, he told the projection, but these little tricks make things a lot easier for me. For a junior apprentice, this is pretty good, isn't it? He held the scale up. Flamel, seeing at a glance that it was a near-perfect storage alchemical item, shook his head slightly. You're an exception. For most people, improving engraving precision and mastering control of sectum sempra, who can say which is harder? That was perhaps the burden of talent. After a moment of triumph, Loren tossed the palm-sized scale aside and cut out an even smaller one. Palm-sized wasn't his limit. Christmas morning arrived. Snow lay thick around the castle, turning the grounds into a pristine white. Bright light streamed into the dormitory, slowly warming the 3 boys in their 4-poster beds. Each tried to stretch their lazy sleep a little longer. Ron pulled the covers over his head, Harry rolled over to the other side, and Loren raised an arm against the glare. It wasn't until Hedwig flew in, landed on Harry's bed, and affectionately nipped his ear that Harry opened his eyes. "Hello!" Seeing Hedwig, parcel clamped in her beak, made anyone cheerful. Harry rubbed his eyes, then used his sleep-sticky hand to ruffle Hedwig's feathers. "Are you here to talk to me again?" Hedwig stepped back with an air of disdain, dropped the parcel by his pillow, and flew to the bedside table to peck at an unsealed bag of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. Harry sat up and threw a pillow at Loren's and Ron's beds. "Hey, Merry Christmas! Get up and open presents!" The soft pillow woke Loren slowly. His mind was still replaying the engraving from the night before. He had shrunk an array down to the size of a grain of rice. His eyes had gone blurry from the tiny, shimmering silver threads. He sat up in his pajamas, feet dangling, searching for slippers he'd kicked off in his half-asleep state. None were to be found, so he climbed out of bed barefoot. At the foot of the beds, a pile of parcels and gift boxes of every shape and size sat waiting. There were dozens. Some Hufflepuffs had sent frozen pears and other treats. As usual, Mrs. Weasley had knitted new sweaters and left a huge fruitcake. Monica and Wendell had sent clothes and books. For various reasons, Loren hadn't prepared gifts for them this year. Ron gave a special box from Honeydukes, and Harry gave a transfiguration book called From Disappearance to Summoning. Loren's gifts to Harry and Ron were the palm-sized storage scales he'd made the night before. At first, the boys were puzzled, but after Loren demonstrated how to use them, their faces lit up. For the next 15 minutes, they were delighted, putting things in and taking them back out, completely absorbed. Seamus had given Loren a Muggle adventure book about middle schoolers who stumble into a fairy tale land, obtain a sword, and rescue a princess from a dragon. Harry and Ron happened to have the other 2 volumes, and together they formed a complete trilogy. The flashlights scattered the darkness of the cave and scared off the monstrous bear, Ron read, pointing to an illustration. "I know this. It's your Muggle world's illumination charm." Loren grinned at Seamus's taste for tales of warriors and grand quests. Snape had left a deep impression on Seamus with his collection of Draught of Living Death. In return, Snape had sent Seamus several liters of his own brew, packed in a small wooden barrel. The smell rising from it made Loren's head swim. Blimey, that could probably make the whole staff and student body faint for centuries, he breathed. Loren's gift to Snape had been a finger-sized storage scale. Storage only secondary, the main point was to show his mastery of Sectum Sempra. Dumbledore had sent a collector's edition of the Tales of Beedle the Bard, the Warlock's Hairy Heart. The story was about a warlock who shut off his feelings, dabbled in the dark arts, and paid a terrible price. It was clear the headmaster still worried about Loren. Loren's gift to Dumbledore was a lady's cashmere hat with long bunny ears, absolutely adorable, stuffed with several pairs of long wool socks, the sort of quaint present the old headmaster would love. Hermione's gift was square and hard, like a book. Loren tore the brown paper away and looked at the title, 300 Facts About Pet Cats. His eye twitched. Merlin's beard! Ron suddenly shouted nearby. A Nimbus 2001. Ron, having finished his presents, had moved next to Harry and was helping him unwrap. Both boys had slipped on the new sweaters from Mrs. Weasley. A piece of fruitcake fell from Ron's mouth onto the carpet. Though Harry loved the broom, he wasn't as happy as he might have been. He sighed. Sirius only sent a broom, no letter. We haven't heard from him in ages. Ron rolled his eyes back so far they nearly disappeared. If I had a godfather like him, I wouldn't complain if he never wrote a letter. At the mention of Sirius, Loren's eyes flickered. Every floor of the castle glittered with Christmas trees trimmed with silver frost and golden stars. Ribbons and magically falling snowflakes hung from the ceilings, dissolved on touching the floor. There was even a small tree in the hospital wing. When Loren arrived there, Hermione sat beneath it, unwrapping gifts. Pomfrey's treatment had cleared most of the cat fur from Hermione's face and body, and her fingers had returned to their usual flexibility. Only the triangular ears at the top of her head, the slender tail tucked beneath her robes, and the large, bright eyes still gave her feline traits. From a distance, she looked like a little cat girl. "Merry Christmas!" Loren greeted her, ruffling her two fluffy ears with a regretful grin. "Looks like you'll be fully recovered soon. Sigh." Hermione pinched her ear and elbowed his hand away. "You sound like you don't want me to get better." "How could that be?" Loren replied with mock solemnity, though his face betrayed the opposite sentiment. Hermione rolled her eyes and didn't want to dwell on the matter. She spread out her hand to show two tiny green objects, the size of rice grains. "What are these? They're so small I almost missed them." "They're upgraded storage items," Loren said. "Don't be fooled by the size. The internal space is as large as a classroom. They're made from basilisk scales, so they're tough. Their tiny size makes them easy to embed into other items, more portable and discreet than sack pouches." He demonstrated by putting a book into one of the rice grain items and taking it back out. Hermione's ears twitched. Then her eyes brightened, as if she'd thought of something. She pulled a whale pendant from her collar, waved her wand to make 2 holes in its eyes, and embedded the rice grain storage scales into them. She showed it to Loren, beaming. "Doesn't it fit perfectly?" Before Loren could answer, she continued in a small, rueful voice. "My gift to you was so ordinary, it can't compare to this. I should have thought of something better. Being stuck in the hospital wing, I even had to send a letter to my father to buy that cat book." "How could that be?" "I really like that book," Loren reassured her. The sight of the pendant she always wore filled him with a warmth he found hard to put into words. The following tale, tucked away in Dumbledore's gift, read aloud by some students that afternoon, went like this: The Warlock's Hairy Heart. Once upon a time, there was a handsome, wealthy, and clever young warlock. He noticed that whenever his friends fell in love, they became silly, indulging in affectations that, to his mind, ruined their taste and dignity. Determined never to become weak like them, he turned to the dark arts to harden his emotions. His family mocked him for his aloofness. "Everything will change," they said, "once a girl captures his heart." But the warlock's heart stayed untouched. Girls were drawn to his proud bearing and tried every subtle charm to win him. None succeeded. He prided himself on his coldness and on the wisdom behind it. Years passed. His contemporaries married and had children. "Their hearts must be hollow now," he scoffed, watching them fuss over babies. When his elderly parents died, he felt no grief. Instead, he took control of their castle, moved his treasures to a deep dungeon, and lived in ease while servants attended his every whim. He thought anyone who saw his life of luxury would envy him. One day, overhearing two valets discuss him, his pride was wounded. One servant felt sorry for the warlock, who had never known love. The other laughed and asked why a man with so much gold and such a palace could not find a wife. That stung. The warlock decided to take a wife, a woman superior to all others. She must be astonishingly beautiful, from a magical family, so their children would be gifted, and rich enough that his life would remain comfortable even after marriage. Though it might have taken 50 years, fate intervened the very next day. A woman who matched his requirements visited relatives nearby. She was a skilled witch of great fortune, stunningly beautiful. Men's hearts stirred at the sight of her, every man except the warlock. Still, she was the prize he sought, so he wooed her. People marveled at his change of heart and told her she had achieved what 100 women could not. The girl found his eagerness both novel and repellent. She sensed the coldness beneath his honeyed words. But her family approved the match, and she accepted his invitation to a grand feast he gave in her honor. The table was set with the finest silver and gold, piled with abundant food. Musicians played lutes while guests sang of a love the warlock had never felt. The girl sat on a throne beside him as he murmured stolen lines of poetry he did not truly understand. She listened, puzzled, and finally said, "You speak well, warlock, and if I believed you had a heart, I should be moved by your gallantry." Laughing, the warlock told her not to worry. He led her away from the feast down to the locked dungeon where his most prized treasure lay. In a magically sealed crystal casket was his heart. Kept in darkness, it had never known beauty, music, or tender touch. It had shriveled and become covered with long black hair. "Oh, what have you done?" the girl cried, horrified. "Put it back where it belongs, please." Seeing that this would please her, the warlock opened the casket, cut open his chest, and thrust the hairy heart back into its cavity. "Now that it is healed, you shall know what true love is," he said. The girl embraced him. Her soft skin, her breath in his ear, the scent of her golden hair, these pierced his newly awakened heart. But in its long exile, the heart had grown strange and savage. Its desires were fierce and perverse. The guests, alarmed by the host's absence, searched the castle and found the dungeon. What they saw was horrifying. The girl lay dead on the floor, her chest cut open, while the maddened warlock crouched nearby, a silver dagger in his hand. Under the guests' horrified gaze, he threw his wand aside, held a heart in each hand, knelt triumphantly, and then collapsed over the girl's corpse and died himself. Beep! Beep! The blue Ford Anglia 105E Deluxe surged across the snow-covered ground, hotly pursuing 3 flying brooms over the Quidditch pitch. After the basilisk incident, they'd found the car near the Acromantula nest, guided to it by Fang and one of the centaurs. With Arthur and Molly away, the car had nowhere to go, and the Weasley twins had easily persuaded everyone to let them keep it for a while. How long they would keep it depended entirely on when the adults remembered to take it away. Through the windshield, George and Fred could be seen in the front seats, faces lit with excitement, mouths never still. "Hurry up! It's my turn to steer!" George leaned across, trying to grab the wheel. "I know, but before that, tell me how to make the magic wipers work." Fred hadn't bothered with a seatbelt. With snow swirling over the glass, he had to stand and peer left and right to get a clear view. "Excuses, you just want to play longer. Move over." "No, don't snatch it! Don't snatch it!" The old Anglia wobbled in the air as if it might fall apart at any moment. Whether it held together because of the manufacturer's luck or Mr. Weasley's tinkering, it never did fall. The occasional drift in midair made Ron, who was flying ahead, scream in fright. Ron rode the brand-new Nimbus 2001. Harry had given it to him after he'd begged, and Harry and Ginny were on 2 Nimbus 2000s. Loren and Hermione sat on the edge of the stands, watching a car and 3 brooms chase one another in the sky. A cloak far too large for her enveloped Hermione completely. Its hood shadowed her head, hiding her small cat ears, and the hem hid her slender tail. No one seemed to notice anything unusual beyond that her outfit was a little odd for the festivities. Hermione wore wool gloves and leaned back in her seat. The cold wind puffed the cloak out, and tiny flakes of snow landed on her face and melted, making her cheeks pink. She had been in the hospital wing for a week, and she seemed to be thoroughly enjoying being outdoors. Her nose sniffed twice. She pointed at Ginny as she swooped past on her broom. Ginny's just like her brothers, so good at flying. She patted Loren's arm excitedly. Do you think it's hereditary? I heard Charlie led his team to win the House Cup in his second year. What about Bill and Percy? They don't look very good at Quidditch, Loren said lazily. Half an hour earlier, he'd reached to stroke Hermione's tail and gotten a well-deserved swat. He was still recovering. A moment later, a thick fir tree swayed into view. When it came close, they saw two large feet sticking out beneath the branches and heard heavy huffing. Hagrid had been released from the Ministry interrogation 2 days ago, keeping Dumbledore's promise that he would make it back to school for Christmas. Hagrid! Merry Christmas, Hermione called, waving. Fresh from the hospital wing, everything outside seemed new and thrilling to her. Hagrid set the tree down and pushed the branches aside to show his face. Oh, Loren, Hermione, Merry Christmas. I heard Hermione was poorly and wanted to visit, but Harry said you were seeing no one. Are you fully better? He stopped when he saw Hermione swathed in her oversized cloak and already knew the answer. He reached to pat her shoulder, then withdrew his hands when he remembered they were muddy and wet. His hesitation looked awkward but sincere. Don't worry, Hermione said. Madame Pomfrey says I'll be all right soon. Hagrid nodded, then turned to Loren with the solemn kindness he reserved for children. As a gentleman, you must take good care of her, right? I am. Loren spread his hands in mock surrender. Hermione peered at the tree and said, Isn't the Great Hall already decorated? We saw Professor Flitwick putting up the Christmas trees. It was brought in from the Forbidden Forest, Loren added. Oh yes, same as I saw, but those are pine trees. Don't you think firs are prettier? Hagrid put a hand on the tree with obvious pride. Loren and Hermione nodded politely. They couldn't tell much of a difference, but smiled anyway. Oi, look, I started it, the windshield wiper. Fred's triumphant shout came from afar. Naughty boy. Professor McGonagall will give him detention if she spots him, Hagrid muttered, picked up the fir tree again, and trudged off toward the castle, leaving deep footprints in the snow. Watching him go, Hermione rested her chin on her hands. There really isn't much difference between pine and fir. Hagrid just wants to add his own touch to Christmas. Loren said. Those who hurt him will get what they deserve. Up in the sky, Harry saw Hagrid and turned, lowering his altitude to meet him. Ron, on the Nimbus 2001, was faster and reached Hagrid first, sticking his head through the branches. Hey, Hagrid, need a hand? The Nimbus 2001 stayed rock steady, even with Ron's antics. Hagrid shook the tree, so a shower of snow fell, drenching Ron, who burst into laughter and zoomed off. You two go and play. I'm coming down to help, Harry called, and he dismounted near Hagrid and followed him. Hagrid, did you go see Aragog? Harry asked after a moment. They hadn't told Hagrid about the Acromantula until the twins had produced the flying car, and Harry had only just remembered. Course I went. I left a note, hoping you lot go find him. I knew Aragog know something. Pride lit Hagrid's face. As he carried the fir tree, he rambled. When I was at school, I hid him in a cupboard in the dungeons, and one day he came to me in a right state, saying he wanted to leave the castle. He wasn't even as big as Fang then, Hagrid went on, pity in his voice. Such a tiny little thing. How could he be expected to make it outside? Harry thought of the Pensieve memory and fell quiet. No spider that big could ever be called tiny. Hagrid continued, but he wouldn't stay in the basement alone, so I put him in a box and hid him. Later, after I was expelled, I asked what he'd sensed, but he wouldn't say. Harry cut in, blunt. He wouldn't tell you then. Our meeting with the colony wasn't exactly friendly. Him didn't say, Hagrid said simply, but I seen the battle marks, and his colony had far fewer spiders. When I picked up Fang, Firenze told me what happened. So you don't blame us? Harry asked. Hagrid gave him a simple, honest smile. Do you remember what the centaur said, Harry? For Aragog's colony, this is a good thing. Forest laws are harsh, eat or be eaten, expansion and invasion. Can't let one species multiply unchecked, that'd bring disaster. They trudged on through the snow, 2 sets of footprints and a long drag mark where Hagrid hauled the tree. Harry realized Hagrid wasn't clumsy the way he pretended. In the forest, with creatures, he was quietly wise. There were other things Harry wanted to ask about, Tom Riddle, Voldemort's past, but seeing Hagrid contented, he kept his questions for another time. When they reached the Great Hall, Loren and Hermione had already returned. Without the burden of a heavy tree, they'd been quicker than Hagrid. Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick were busy arranging decorations. The hall looked glorious. Garlands of holly and mistletoe on the walls, and dozens of Christmas trees standing about. Their branches hung with icicle-like ornaments that glowed with colored lights like frozen candles. "You've come just in time, Hagrid," Flitwick said, cheerful. "This fir should go in the center of the hall, don't you think?" Hagrid's face brightened, and with a grunt of effort, rather than a levitation charm, he set the tree perfectly in the center. Flitwick followed, conjuring streams of golden bubbles that caught and scattered the light. Hermione's eyes shone at the sight. Loren brushed snow from her voluminous cloak. "It's beautiful, Hermione. I don't think you need to hide it all." Before Hermione could answer, Dumbledore had somehow appeared beside them, wearing a fluffy, cream-colored hat with bunny ears. For an old man, it looked ludicrous. For Dumbledore, it looked perfectly natural. "For what it's worth, I agree," he said gently. He saw right through Hermione's cloak. Concealment was useless before him. Hermione's face went deep red, and she shook her head. Loren stepped forward and cleared his throat. "Professor, whether she hides isn't decided by whether others like it. It's what she thinks that matters." Dumbledore considered that for a moment. What's important isn't the gaze of others, but one's own thoughts. That's very philosophical. He said it as if savoring a fine line of poetry. Harry stared, baffled, at the bunny ear hat. Dumbledore noticed Harry's glance and pinched one ear. "A Christmas gift," he said with a wink. "From Loren." Harry and Hermione turned to Loren in unison, eyes wide. Dumbledore beamed. "This is the best Christmas present I've received this year." Loren flushed a little. "I knew you'd like it. I know of a mechanical one with a switch, ears that move when you press it. I'll get you that next time." "I'm already looking forward to it," Dumbledore said with a twinkle. 4 of them, an old headmaster and 3 young wizards, watched Flitwick and Hagrid decorate, chatting and laughing, bringing a warm, lively mood to the hall. It lasted until Professor McGonagall intercepted them, her face suddenly businesslike. "Headmaster Dumbledore," she said without preamble, "about that matter, have you reached a decision?" The air seemed to cool several degrees as everyone straightened. "Please, Minerva, it's Christmas!" Dumbledore pleaded, adjusting his bunny ears with a pathetic little motion. "Make no mistake," McGonagall replied sharply. "Hurry, the holidays won't last forever." When she walked away, the group relaxed. Harry looked from one face to another. They had beaten Voldemort, the basilisk issue had been cleared up, Crabbe was in ministry custody, Hagrid had been acquitted. What urgent matter could be left? Dumbledore shot Loren a sharp look, and then quietly said, "It's Lockhart. He cannot continue in the post. We still have no Defense Against the Dark Arts professor for next term." Loren, who had been watching Flitwick's charms and tracing their basic spells in his head, kept an innocent expression. Hermione noticed the headmaster's glance, and Loren looked suddenly guilty. Harry's first reaction escaped him. "Great," he blurted, then tried to make it sound sympathetic. "Aye, it's unfortunate, of course." Dumbledore smiled at Harry's clumsy attempt at solemnity. Then, lowering his voice to a meaningful murmur, he said, "I believe I may have thought of a very good candidate for the position." As dusk fell, the Christmas feast officially began. The fir tree in the center of the great hall shone with 1,000 lights and glittering baubles. Garlands of mistletoe and holly hung from the ceiling, and gentle, warm, dry snowflakes drifted down with a touch of magic. Dumbledore slipped out for a moment and returned in a red robe embroidered in gold that caught the candlelight. His beard was tied with a red ribbon, and he wore that ridiculous hat with rabbit ears. With his benign smile, even the hat seemed less out of place. "Look what I see!" Fred shouted as soon as he burst into the hall. He and George ran up to Dumbledore, grinning. "Tell us, are you Santa Claus, summoned by magic, Professor?" Loren noticed black grease smudges on their robes and smelled faint petrol in the air. The twins had almost certainly been tinkering with the flying car again, opening its hood, maybe even taking bits off. Poor car. After surviving a whole term in the Forbidden Forest, It might well be reduced to scrap just days after being found. Dumbledore's face broke into a soft smile. Oh, when I was young, I fancied a bit of that myself. I even tried a few experimental charms. Cool, the twins cried, pestering Dumbledore for the recipe to summon Santa. Right up until the start of the feast, Dumbledore had wanted to sit at the Gryffindor table like one of the students. But Professor McGonagall's withering glare eventually drove him back to the high table. Hermione gave him one look and leaned toward Loren. Professor McGonagall's more like the principal. Dumbledore's less like a professor and more like a child being managed by her. Loren nodded. Dumbledore did seem childlike sometimes. A burst of laughter from the Gryffindor table. Percy had arrived. Unlike his siblings, he hadn't worn one of Mrs. Weasley's knitted jumpers over his robes. He looked prim and grown-up, hair meticulously combed and a prefect badge pinned to his chest. Unfortunately for him, the twins had enchanted the badge so that prefect now read idiot. Percy, oblivious, pouted and showed it off with exaggerated pride, which sent Ron into a fit of laughter so violent he nearly slid under the table. "What are you laughing at?" Percy demanded, bewildered. "Did something happen before I arrived?" Harry pointed. Percy looked down. The word idiot hit him like a blow. His carefully styled hair bristled in anger. "George! Fred!" he barked. The twins leapt up and shrieked, "Help! The idiot prefect is going to eat us!" The three of them then chased each other around the long tables, round and round through Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Slytherin, stopping only when one of the twins set off a filibuster firework or an exploding snap. Percy tried to retaliate, but the twins' goading was relentless. Soon Dumbledore, humming a Christmas carol, signaled the start of the feast. There were roast birds and meats, lamb chops and stews, but what the younger students flocked to most were the puddings. Set in delicate jelly were pulps of strawberries, mangoes, and peaches that gleamed temptingly. Hermione polished off 3 bowls of strawberry pudding, red jam gleaming on her lips. Loren's plate, by contrast, was piled with meat. Watching Hermione gleefully scrape pudding from her spoon tempted Loren to steal a taste. "Is the pudding really that good?" he asked. "What do you want?" Hermione's ears twitched and she clutched her bowl protectively. "Get your own." "Good things are meant to be shared," Loren said, pushing her arm aside and scooping a generous mouthful. It melted without much chewing. Sweetness slid pleasantly down his throat. "It's the same as always." Hermione smacked his chest in mock indignation. At the high table, McGonagall and Dumbledore murmured back and forth. Snape sat nearby, his face sullen. He seemed displeased by whatever they discussed. Hagrid, beside Professor Flitwick, guzzled eggnog with the abandon of someone pleased yet worryingly different from previous Christmases. Ron and Harry set off exploding snaps at intervals, producing tiny white mice and occasionally little felt hats or wizarding toys. The magical ceiling shimmered, early on, brilliant gold and scarlet. By the end of the feast, the flashing slowed and settled into a cool deep blue like the night sky beyond the castle. The tree stayed in warm golden red, no matter what. Hermione had been cooped up in the hospital wing for days, and the desserts had been something of a consolation. After the last spoonful, she sighed, patted her stomach, and leaned back, eyes half closed. "You go find Madame Pomfrey later and tell her you ate too much so she can give you a digestive potion," she muttered as they rose to leave, dragging Loren with her. She'd be scolded, she knew. Madame Pomfrey never missed a chance. Loren said nothing. Not only was she greedy, he thought with amusement, she wanted him to take the blame too. When had Hermione become like this? He wondered. Near the entrance, Draco Malfoy sat at the end of the Slytherin table and watched Loren and Hermione. He no longer held the same disdain for them he'd felt as a first year. It wasn't their grades that had changed his view so much as Loren himself. Unlike other students, Loren had never tried to flatter Draco for family status, nor had he been hostile because of Draco's pure-blood attitude. He treated Draco like any other student. That had made a difference. That morning, Draco, too, had received a storage scale from the other gifts. His family possessed similar devices. He had learned to use it easily and slipped it into his robe pocket. He also found a letter from his parents with strict instructions. Keep away from Crabbe, keep away from Marcus Flint, keep away from anyone influenced by pure-blood fanaticism. Keep away from Potter, Keep away from the Weasleys, and do not draw attention to yourself." Lucius's tone baffled Draco. If the Dark Lord were returning, why tell him to avoid certain pure-blood classmates? If not, why not show open support for Dumbledore and Harry Potter? The letter lay folded inside the scale, while Draco watched Loren disappear into the crowd. He mouthed, "Merry Christmas," but no sound escaped. Over the next few days, Ron and Harry followed the twins' example and made life lively. Hagrid's hut became a chaotic aviary. Chickens took wing and Fang bounded about. Hagrid complained that some of the animals near the forest had developed a sudden fear of car horns. Now, at the sound of the flying car's horn, they scattered. On a dull, ordinary day of the holidays, Harry came back to the Gryffindor common room, mud and snow-covered. By the fire, he found Loren sitting quietly, absorbed in a book. Loren's dark hair and eyes gleamed in the hearthlight. He looked like a model student, focused and serious. Harry felt a pang of guilt. After days of carefree play, the usual school year itch to study had crept up on him. "Harry Potter," he muttered to himself. "You've got a mission. No more slacking." "Study properly starting tomorrow," he told himself, and began to move away. Loren looked up from his book and watched him go. "He's being mystical," Loren murmured, glancing at Dumbledore's marginal notes in his edition. Dumbledore had given him The Wizard's Hairy Heart, Collector's Edition. The story itself was a short one, but this edition was padded with translations into 17 languages, Merperson script, Centaur script, ancient runes, and Dumbledore had written extensive, rather mystical annotations in the back. The next morning, Harry woke Loren up. Loren fought the sleep from his eyes and, still groggy, heard Harry say one word, "Dueling?" "Dueling practice?" Ron, dragged out of bed and still half asleep, snapped awake. Hermione, wearing a red beret, stayed behind. Though her recovery was ongoing, she looked steadier than before. Harry looked at his friends and said with determination, "We can't keep playing like this." "You can study by memorizing," Ron offered half-heartedly. Harry's face reddened. "I can't concentrate. I fall asleep as soon as I try to read." "No wonder you went to bed so early last night. No wonder you're so energetic today," his friends teased. They settled on a plan. They'd practiced dueling before, nothing too dangerous, gentle but effective spells. Hermione's magic was still unreliable, so she sat out. Harry and Ron would spar while Loren observed and gave suggestions. They avoided harmful hexes, no Diffindo, no Cruciatus mimicry, sticking instead to spells like Petrificus Totalis, Stupefy, Expelliarmus, and the Knockback Jinx. At first, they were evenly matched. A spell, a dodge, a counter, another dodge. Then the pace picked up and movement slowed. Ron went first with Petrificus Totalis. Harry answered with Expelliarmus, breaking the cuff. A dim red light from another spell flew toward Ron, who dodged clumsily. When it was Harry's turn, he fired Expelliarmus. Ron's Stupefy came after, but was easily scattered by Harry's quick disarming charm. The effort left Ron off balance. Frustrated, Ron tried again, this time an Expelliarmus of his own, but Harry's response was the same, simple and strong. A steady, precise Expelliarmus that scattered whatever Ron threw at him. No matter how Ron varied his spells, Harry answered with the same clean, disarming charm, leaving Ron more and more winded. Eventually, Ron's stamina gave out. He failed to dodge and was shoved back several steps. His wand flew from his fingers and clattered to the floor. Clutching his chest, Ron panted and glared at Harry. "Expelliarmus? Expelliarmus! You only know how to cast the disarming spell. Don't you know any others?" Harry handed back his wand, eyes innocent. "But Expelliarmus is really useful." Ron was so furious he could feel it in his teeth, but there was nothing he could do about Harry. After a few more grumbles, the two were pulled aside by Loren. "Let's be clear," Loren said. "Dueling isn't like solving a homework problem. There isn't one right answer everyone agrees on. My advice comes from my understanding and practice. Take what helps you. The best fighting style is the one you build around your own strengths." "Enough, Loren," Ron snapped. "Just tell me how to stop his bloody Expelliarmus. I'm ready to pin him down and pummel him." "You still don't sound level-headed," Harry said with a smug look that made Ron grit his teeth again. "All right, back to dueling," Loren said, drawing their attention. "Harry, your Expelliarmus is very strong. Some adults can't match you. That's partly natural talent and partly Professor Flitwick's excellent teaching." Harry nodded. From the first time he'd seen the spell, he'd been drawn to it. After hearing Flitwick speak at the Charms Club, he'd almost immediately chosen Expelliarmus to specialize in. With repeated practice, he developed a fine control of accuracy and speed. You've mastered the spell technically, Loren continued, but your dueling awareness is too naive. Your targets are too obvious. Your mind is fixed on hitting him directly with the spell. No strategy. That's why Ron could dodge most of your attacks, only getting hit when he ran out of stamina. If I hadn't been so tired, I could have kept you on the run all day, Ron agreed. Harry replayed their fight. He'd been pressuring Ron, but beyond blasting Expelliarmus over and over, he hadn't found a quick way to end it. Try using other movements or spells to hide your target. Pin his body, restrict his dodging, create openings. Back in your first year, you used levitation and transfiguration to conceal your knockback jinx. Now that you've mastered a more powerful spell, you've lost that awareness. Harry scratched his head. The strength of Expelliarmus had given him the illusion that continuous fire would win the day. He realized Loren was right. Hermione, standing nearby, felt the same about herself. Since her cat change, she had relied on speed and strength, and mostly succeeded, but Loren had apparated away during that chase, and if they had fought outside Hogwarts, she might never have caught him. She pursed her lips. Ron leaned forward. My turn, please. How do I deal with his annoying Expelliarmus? Loren smiled. Have you realized that if Expelliarmus doesn't hit you, you don't have to worry about it at all? No matter how powerful it is, it means nothing if it never connects. Ron's eyes widened. You don't have to pay attention? Yes. Harry's Expelliarmus, and your spells only meet in midair for a moment, giving you a chance to slip away. If you can anticipate his dodge and move as his wand falls, even before the spell's light arrives, no matter how powerful it is, it won't find you. I could also strike back right after he casts, Ron said, picturing it. He swallowed. The idea tempted him. And practice, Loren added. Practice your shield charm. Practice your counters. Mastery makes dueling much cleaner. They took Loren's advice to heart, replaying the first duel in their heads and testing theories. 10 minutes later, they were at it again. No formalities this time. They stood 5 or 6 meters apart, wands at their chests, watching each other. Harry took the initiative. Expelliarmus, he shot. Ron watched Harry's arm and the tip of his wand. At the flash of an instant, he saw the spell's path. He stepped 2 light-footed paces to the left. The familiar red beam curved, struck the ground behind Ron's right side, and fizzled. A grin crept across Ron's face. It was easier than he'd thought. Harry's movements, his gaze, even his tendency to aim at the chest made the landing point predictable. Like chess, Ron thought, guess your opponent's mind, and you get the edge. He was determined to seize his next opportunity to counterattack. Harry felt the blood pumping faster. The wand seemed to hum with eagerness. The duel intensified. Harry hurled tables, chairs, and benches with levitation charms to create barricades and limit Ron's movement. Ron used them as cover, ducking and popping out to fire spells. He even transfigured the legs of a desk into hooves, trying to make it charge. It remained a desk on top, but the wobbling hooves moved forward before a strong Expelliarmus blew them apart. Both boys showed a natural aptitude for combat. Offense and defense braided together with the bits of magic they knew. Skills developed into experience, experience into instinct. For Loren and Hermione, though, these exchanges were still somewhat rudimentary. Their private duels were faster, with sharper switches between spells and techniques. Hermione walked over to Loren. Well, she teased. Professor Morgan, are you satisfied with them? You really sounded like a proper teacher back there. It's all right. Loren accepted the title calmly. Come on, Hermione urged, grabbing his arm. I have questions for you. She pulled him into the library, diving eagerly among the stacks. Few students came during the holidays, and the basilisk scare had sent most younger pupils home, so only Madame Pince remained. She glanced at them long enough to be sure they wouldn't be noisy, and then ignored them. Loren read the spines Hermione pulled out. Apparition Exam Guide. Safe apparition starts here. Magical Transportation Safety Act. You want to learn apparition? He asked, more statement than question. Hermione's eyes lit up. She must have seen him learn apparition secretly and thought it feasible for herself. Recalling his own many mishaps of splitting described in that dreadful book, Loren's scalp prickled. He reached and steadied the stack of books in her arms. Hermione, practicing apparition without supervision is against school rules, he warned. Oh? Hermione rolled her eyes at him. Coming from Loren, it almost sounded like a dare. Loren steered her into a quiet corner and, after some coaxing, explained the risks. Drawing on his own experience, he described grisly scenarios, splits that left you with broken limbs or worse, places where flesh and bone were exposed. He made the dangers vivid. Hermione listened, frowning. He might have survived broken arms and wild falls. That didn't mean it was safe for her to try alone. So you split many times practicing? Hermione asked, voice suddenly sharp. The room seemed to hold its breath. Loren winced, then nodded. It was the only way to make her understand. Hermione's face flushed with anger. She tapped the books against his chest once for each word as she scolded him. Practice. Dangerous. Magic. Practice. Dangerous magic. When she stopped, her eyes were rimmed red. I do have a safe method, Loren said softly. When I first tried it, Professor Flitwick watched. I passed on the first try. His voice dropped. Don't rush. I've heard older students say that when you turn 17, you can take the apparition exam. Hogwarts runs supervised classes with professional watchers. That's the safe way. Hermione made a small sound and bent back to the shelves, gathering reference books. Hey, Loren called, anxious. Don't worry, I won't practice on my own. Besides, you can't apparate within Hogwarts anyway. I'm just curious. He didn't notice Hermione's pupils, remnants of her recent change, narrowing to vertical slits for a moment, bright and cunning. If a professor supervised, then it might be safe, she hummed softly. That evening, Loren came up to the fat lady and into the Gryffindor common room. Ron's gloating laugh carried across the space. Harry, your Expelliarmus is powerful, but you still can't beat me yet. Ha ha! Only Harry and Ron were there. They had waited deliberately. Ron saw Loren and dragged him onto the sofa, recounting his heroic deeds with all the glee of a man who'd finally won a grudge match. In their second duel, the boys had gone a dozen rounds. Because Expelliarmus was tiring to cast repeatedly, Harry's speed had slowed. Ron seized a moment and finished the fight with a well-timed Petrificus Totalis. Harry's expression was all helplessness. We each won one, he protested. Ron's laughter drowned him out. This victory would be retold ad nauseum for months. On the 8th day after the Christmas feast, the last of Hermione's cat hairs fell out. She was fully herself again, and the little cat girl, nickname finally had no basis. Loren felt a pang of regret at the moment of her recovery. The rest of the holiday was busy and satisfying for Loren. He studied alchemy and runes with Flamel's guidance, joined Harry for dueling practice sometimes, and spent most of his spare time with Hermione, reviewing material for the Animagus test and answering her questions about apparition. One morning, the honking of the flying car was smothered by the whistle of the Hogwarts Express. The holiday was over. The basilisk's threat was momentarily forgotten in the bustle of returning students. At the start of term feast, tired pupils chattered about their holidays. Dumbledore's smile didn't fade. At the Gryffindor table, Loren, Harry, and Ron kept their heads down, avoiding the gaze of the person opposite them. Hermione and Neville watched with interest. Seamus was beside himself. I never expected. Well, I knew it, he cried. You lot slipped into the Slytherin common room with Polyjuice, killed the basilisk with Gryffindor's sword, and got rid of that useless Lockhart. My hunch was right. Crabbe was the heir. Seamus's disappointment at having missed out showed on his face. If I'd stayed at school over Christmas, Seamus Finnigan's name would be on the Gryffindor champions list. He blamed his roommates with theatrical anguish. You did it on the very day the holidays started, just after I left. Seamus drifted into a lament. If only I'd stayed a few minutes longer, even stuffed into a stocking as a present, I'd have stayed. Harry shot Loren a look, then began signaling with his eyes. Hold on, it was only a few days. It would be fine. Loren nodded subtly. Just as Seamus was nearly inconsolable, Dean leaned over, placed a large hand on his arm, and whispered, Look at the top table, the seat next to Dumbledore. Seamus looked up. A figure in a black cloak sat beside Dumbledore, face almost entirely hidden. Only the faintest chin showed as the person ate. Dean said, I've heard that's the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, replacing Lockhart. Dark arts professor. Someone who hides their face. Quirrell. Lockhart. The words fit together in Seamus's head and set him trembling with excitement. "Is it what I think?" he stammered. Dean nodded. Their eyes met, and, for a moment, the noise of the great hall fell away. Now the new defense against the dark arts professor was right there, and Seamus felt a fierce, single thought rise in him. This might be his only chance to make his name as a Gryffindor champion. 227, Professor Black. He's hiding his face, so he's definitely up to no good. Dean said again, certain. When the feast ends, we'll follow him. When he walks out of the great hall, he made a dramatic fist, voice firm. We'll yank off his cloak and show everyone his true, terrible face. The idea of unmasking a dark wizard sent a shiver of excitement down Seamus's spine. It's settled, then. Not far away at the Hufflepuff table, Hannah Abbott, her golden ponytail bobbing, sighed. School's atmosphere really is the best. After spending Christmas here last year, going home this year felt, well, she shook her head, a little scared. The first few days were fine, but then my mum started nagging about everything. It was unbearable. Ernie Macmillan snorted. Come on, it couldn't have been as bad as Justin. He was in the hospital wing the whole holiday. The name lit a dozen whispers among the students. Ernie glanced over at the Gryffindor table, saw Harry sitting perfectly well, pouted, and went on. Who knows if that monster in the Chamber of Secrets will strike again? If they don't solve it, the school could be forced to close. A pure-blood boy next to him added, It happened 50 years ago, too. The chamber was open then, and the school almost sent everyone home. Some of the less informed students leaned forward, eager. So the chamber's been opened before? Tell us what happened. The matter's been resolved. Neville spoke up, solemn. The monster's been dealt with, and Slytherin's heir has been caught. Neville, do you have more details? Tell us. A clear clinking of glass from the high table cut them off. Professor McGonagall tapped her goblet with a spoon. The sound snapped across the hall. Attention, everyone. It's a new term again. It's wonderful to see you all. Headmaster Dumbledore rose, smiling. Perhaps you've heard it many times, but I'll say it again. Hogwarts welcomes you back. I imagine many parents suggested transferring you after the troubles last term, he said, growing lighter. The remark drew laughter. Lee Jordan cheered. Don't worry, Professor. We'll always belong to Hogwarts. Dumbledore made a wiping gesture at his eyes as if he'd been moved to tears. Thank you, thank you. The students laughed, and Dumbledore held up his hand twice to restore silence. I am very pleased to announce that the monster in the Chamber of Secrets has been dealt with. The Great Hall went quietly expectant. This is thanks to a few brave and clever students who investigated the truth themselves. I would like to commend them. He cleared his throat. After a brief pause, as if recalling the details, he continued. First, Mr. Harry Potter and Mr. Ron Weasley, who, to save their kidnapped classmate, bravely faced the monster without flinching. I award Gryffindor 200 points. Gryffindor erupted. The cheer threatened to shake the enchanted ceiling. The stars above twinkled in sympathy. Percy, elated, grabbed Penelope and practically shouted to the other prefects. It's my brother, Ron, my youngest brother. They killed the monster in the Chamber of Secrets. Ron could hardly contain himself. He tugged on Harry's robe, swaying with pride as he showed off to the nearby students. And Mr. Loren Morgan and Miss Hermione Granger, who unraveled the truth from a maze of confusion, found Slytherin's heir and identified the true monster in the Chamber of Secrets. For their wisdom, I award Gryffindor 100 points. Hermione was instantly swarmed by her roommates. Lavender peppered her with questions about the chamber and the basilisk. Hermione smiled and answered carefully. Loren, who'd been watching, met Dumbledore's encouraging gaze and then looked away, guilty but pleased. Professor McGonagall, usually stern, smiled brightly. At the Slytherin table, Professor Snape's dinner knife scraped his plate in a long, irritated creak. The Weasley twins were the loudest, banging the table and setting off a fresh roar from Gryffindor. The noise was deafening. The Gryffindor students, who'd been silently calculating the House Cup standings, suddenly forgot to count. Leading by 300 points, the cup was essentially theirs. No biased marking could bridge that gap now. Slytherin's faces fell. Draco stabbed his stake in the same practiced motion as Snape, looking glum. Beside him, Goyle sat dazed, the place where Crabbe should have been glaringly empty. Goyle's mind wasn't quick, but he'd noticed Crabbe had changed over the holiday. Crabbe had grown quieter, doing his homework properly and learning spells faster. He'd become distant, a loner. One night during the break, Crabbe simply didn't return to the dormitory. At first, Goyle assumed Crabbe had gone home for Christmas. Malfoy had gone, after all. But Crabbe never came back. Now his chair remained empty, and Goyle had a vague, sinking feeling that Crabbe might not return at all. The Quidditch captain, Marcus Flint, had heard rumors from his parents and was watching the drama unfold with keen interest. As the cheers died down, Flint stood. "Headmaster Dumbledore, can you tell us more? Is the heir really Vincent Crabbe?" The Slytherins all glanced at the empty seat and erupted. "Crabbe's not here!" "How can he be missing from the first night feast? Is he really Slytherin's heir?" The students in other houses, who didn't know Crabbe, began piecing things together from the snippets they heard. Dumbledore rapped his goblet, quieting them. Vincent Crabbe was indeed involved in the Chamber of Secrets incident, but as a headmaster and a citizen, I cannot mix rumor with theory before the Ministry of Magic has completed its investigation. A chorus of disappointed groans swept the hall. By awarding points to the boys who solved the mystery, Dumbledore had hinted at the outcome, and everyone was desperate for more. Some students, cleverer than others, realized they could simply ask the people who had been directly involved. "One more announcement before the feast officially begins," Dumbledore said, directing everyone's attention down the table to Hagrid. Mr. Rubus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds, was wrongly accused 50 years ago during the opening of the chamber. Even recently, some who did not know the facts sought to blame him again. The revelation stunned many. Those who had been told the older story by parents during the holidays began explaining it to their neighbors, and conversation buzzed through the hall. Dumbledore raised his voice again. "Now the truth has been uncovered, and I hereby declare Mr. Hagrid innocent." All eyes turned to Hagrid. He tightened his moleskin overcoat and slowly rose. His gaze swept the four tables, lingering on the faces of the students as if searching for the boy he once was. Hagrid's childhood had been hard. His giant mother, Fridwulfa, had returned to her tribe when he was small, leaving his short father to raise him alone. By the age of 6, he was already huge, and life on the edge of society shaped him. He had been overjoyed, and so had his father, when they received their Hogwarts letters. School had not always been easy. His size made him a target, but Gryffindor had felt like home. Then, in his 3rd year, he'd been implicated in Myrtle's death and expelled. By the time he realized he'd been unjustly treated, his father had already passed away. The brightness of the hall made Hagrid's eyes mist. He steadied himself and met Harry's gaze. "If it weren't for you, Harry, Loren, Hermione, Ron, I'm sure I'd still be sitting in that ministry interrogation room. So I just wanted to say thank you." "Hogwarts can't do without you, Hagrid." George and Fred clapped wildly, and soon the whole hall joined in. Harry returned Hagrid's look with a smile. Dumbledore raised a hand and the applause faded. "One last item. Professor Lockhart will not be returning next term. He must go elsewhere to recover his memory." Cheers broke out at that news, and even some of the staff applauded. However, the Defense Against the Dark Arts class cannot be left untaught. I am pleased to welcome a new professor this term. Professor Black has kindly agreed to fill the vacancy in Defense Against the Dark Arts. Harry stared in disbelief. The hooded figure at the high table stood and pulled back the hood. Beneath it was a familiar face, Sirius Black, smiling as he bowed to the students of the 4 houses. A few scattered claps echoed through the hall. Most of the younger students didn't know him. Seamus let out a weak hand clap. "The plan failed. I didn't expect him to reveal himself." Dean nodded slowly, disappointed. "And look at Professor Snape. Didn't you say he always wanted to teach Defense Against the Dark Arts?" Hermione leaned close to Loren and whispered. Lauren's eyes were cold when she looked up. Professor McGonagall beamed, but Snape only scraped his knife across his plate and stared. The new term had begun with surprises for everyone. 228, new semester. Loren, are you listening?" Hermione waved a hand in front of Loren's face. He blinked, the coldness in his eyes suddenly melting away. He shook his head at Hermione and chuckled. "It's nothing. I just zoned out for a moment. Oh, I need to go to the loo. Be right back, Loren said, standing and slipping quickly out of the great hall. As he walked away, Hermione turned and looked toward Professor Black at the high table. Her gaze was deep and searching. She refused to believe she had imagined what she had seen. The banquet continued in high spirits. With so many extraordinary events, Harry hardly knew which was the most spectacular. After the feast, the prefects led their houses back to the common rooms. The professors didn't make many rules about celebrations. Only Professor McGonagall spoke quietly to Filch and arranged to delay lights out by an hour. In the Gryffindor common room, George slapped Ron on the back with a loud thunk. "Where's Harry? Where did Harry go?" he called. "We're celebrating. All night! All night!" Fred chimed in, and the two of them went on like a pair of drummers, setting a festive rhythm. They were surrounded by excited students, eager to begin the party. Ron, clutching his chest, as if to stop his brother from metaphorically murdering him on the first night of term, shouted, "He went to find his godfather. Professor Black is his godfather." The news sparked a flurry of chatter. With one champion absent, the others poured their excitement onto Hermione, Angelina looping an arm around her and leading a circle of bright-eyed girls to pepper her with questions and praise. Hermione was swept away by the tide of attention. She glanced back and saw Loren standing with the boys, whispering and apparently directing all the teasing toward Ron. At the last moment before the crowd swallowed her view, she caught Loren turn and give her a mischievous smile. On the other side of the castle, Harry led Sirius Black to the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's office. The house elf had already tidied it. Beyond the furniture being in place, even the cobwebby corners had been cleaned. "Without Lockhart's photos and portraits, this office looks much better," Harry said cheerfully. "What do you think, Professor Black?" "Honestly, that title still sounds odd. I'll probably take a while to get used to it," Sirius said with a wry chuckle. A house elf popped out of the little room off the office, his voice high and excited. "The room inside is very clean. Dobby has made your bed and the things in your trunk are all neatly arranged." Harry's eyes went wide. "Dobby, how are you here?" "Sirius Black set Dobby free," the elf squealed, looking up at Harry. The moonlight from the nearest window made his bulbous eyes gleam. "Kind Master Black gave Dobby his freedom." Harry, stunned, pointed at Sirius and asked, "What happened exactly?" "Oh, that's a long story." Sirius raised an eyebrow and told how he'd been at a banquet in Malfoy Manor, encountered Dobby, and in the end secured his freedom from Narcissa. "Not only that," Dobby interrupted, tugging at the strap of his small vest to show off, "Kind Master Black gave Dobby a vest. He gave Dobby his freedom." Sirius couldn't help but wince. "That isn't a vest so much as a bit of old house rags," he said. "An elf gains freedom when their master gives them clothing," Sirius explained, seeing Harry's confused look. "It doesn't have to be the master's own clothes. It just has to be given by the master." Dobby happily pulled up the other strap and bounced on his feet in front of Harry. Sirius, watching, felt a small pang. It all still made him uneasy. "Dumbledore has arranged for Dobby to work in the Hogwarts kitchens," he added. "Dumbledore pays him 1 galleon a week. Dobby should work in the kitchens and not fuss over me." Dobby bowed and promised in his piping voice, "Dobby will repay Mr. Black. Dobby's earnings will pay back Mr. Black." With a small snap of his fingers, Dobby vanished back toward the kitchens. After the elf had gone, Sirius went around the desk and sat in the professor's chair. The perspective was awkward, so he moved the chair aside and sat with Harry instead. "Don't let your guard down," he said. "Remember what Dobby said about werewolves. We still don't know why the Malfoys would be tangled up with them." Harry shrugged. "Whatever they plan, this is Hogwarts. Dumbledore is here. Werewolves. School. Dumbledore." The words lingered in Sirius's mind. He had been out of Azkaban for only a year and still wasn't sure how to face Moony. He had been rash back then. There were better ways he could have handled things that might have punished Pettigrew and protected Harry and looked after Lupin. In a few short, terrible days, friendships had shattered. Betrayals had happened. Some of the marauders had been killed, some had fled, some imprisoned. Sirius could barely imagine how Lupin had endured those days. Harry toyed with a paperweight on the desk. He wasn't worried for his own safety. He wanted to know what Voldemort's followers and these werewolves had planned. He hadn't been able to find much on werewolves at school. Defense against the dark arts hadn't covered them. Then he remembered something Hermione had been reading. Werewolves, he mumbled, then brightened. Hermione. She was reading The Prophet non-stop. She said the ministry brought in new anti-werewolf laws. He counted on his fingers. She said the laws would squeeze werewolves out of their homes, make it hard for them to find jobs. She said it was discrimination and that gentle werewolves might be forced into doing horrible things. Sirius's expression tightened. Anything else? Any other news? No, only what Hermione said, Harry replied. Sirius was quiet for a moment, then asked hesitantly, Harry, if you had a terrible fight with your best friend and you did something that really hurt him, would you go after him? Would you try to make things right? Harry blinked. I don't know. Loren and Hermione are always sensible. Ron and I argue sometimes, but we always make up the next day. Sirius looked almost nostalgic at the picture Harry painted of the school friends. He saw in it echoes of the old marauders, Prongs' constant foolishness, Moony's problem, and the betrayal of Wormtail. Mentioning Wormtail twisted Sirius's face. Harry watched his godfather with a cautious curiosity. Did you have a fight with your friends? He asked tentatively. Some things you don't ask, little wizard, Sirius said, brushing the subject away and spinning himself back to the present. You should get back to the common room. Your friends are probably waiting. He stood and walked Harry to the door. On the way back, the full-length mirror he'd ignored caught his eye. This mirror is too big, he murmured. From one angle, it caught the ceiling candlelight and dazzled his eyes. He flipped the mirror to face the wall and felt marginally better. He prepared for the next day's lesson, washed up, changed into pajamas, and fell asleep almost immediately. Travel had worn him out. Hair ties, puffs, came faint, distant sounds. Sirius woke, disoriented, standing in the middle of an unfamiliar room. There was a desk, a chair, a bookshelf, a suitcase in the corner, and a large standing mirror nearly as tall as a person at the doorway. A stranger to himself for a moment, he remembered the chase. He had chased Wormtail here. James and Lily had been pursued many times. To protect them and baby Harry, he had secretly arranged for Peter Pettigrew to be the secret keeper while he diverted the Death Eaters. Peter had betrayed him. Rage surged, and he flung open the door. Outside, a bakery displayed a young couple buying pastries with their child. A shop assistant laughed with them. A bustling Muggle street lined with stalls and vendors stretched out, and at a little bookstall, a small boy with black hair and dark eyes looked up at Sirius as if he had been waiting. 2 books lay on a sheet of white fur in front of him. The boy tilted his head and spoke so softly it felt like the voice was right at Sirius's ear. If you keep chasing, a tragedy will happen. Many people will die. This is a Muggle street. There shouldn't be a fight here, should there? Sirius felt dizzy. Flash images flashed through his mind. An explosion's fire blooming like an unstoppable wave, a shopfront overturned, exposed pipes, screams. It all passed in a blink. The couple from the bakery strolled on, laughing. In the street, Peter Pettigrew darted past. Sirius didn't think. He lifted his wand and shouted, "Peter Pettigrew, you'll pay for what you did!" Then the explosion unfurled, fire swallowing the street. In the aftermath, Sirius heard a sound like glass cracking across a lake and woke to silver light from the mirror and the memory, a fragment of that chase. Had it been a dream? He groped for reasons for the dream, thinking of Lupin, guilt, regret. None of it sat comfortable. The mirror's surface seemed to crack. Then he was back in that strange room. At the shop stall, the black-haired boy looked up again, voice distant. "You shouldn't be here, should you?" The vision faded, but it left Sirius raw. The next day, the second years were eager for whatever a new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor would bring. At least Lockhart was gone, and the class might stop being a circus. Sirius looked more pale and tired than spirited. Bloodshot eyes, cracked lips, but his voice carried better than his appearance. Hermione watched him closely. Something in her instincts said something was off. Loren watched without a ripple of emotion. He had no wish to torment Sirius. If Sirius chose repentance, any illusion could be fragile. If he did not, the illusion might become his nightmare and force him to choose again and again. Sirius drew back a silken cloth beside him and revealed a cage full of Cornish pixies, bluish-gray, 8 inches tall, with sharp faces and voices like tin whistles. The moment the cloth came off, they began to shriek, bounding against the bars and leaping like a cloud of angry birds. The memory of Lockhart's disastrous pixie lesson made a nervous rumble ripple through the class. "Don't scream, that only provokes them," Sirius said lightly, trying to ease the tension. Neville, who had been in the front row during Lockhart's class, shuffled back. "I don't want to be hung from the ceiling again," he muttered. Seamus clapped Neville on the shoulder, ribbing him like a friend. "Come on, mate, you survived a python. Show some Gryffindor courage." "You didn't get hung from the ceiling, so of course you'd say that," Neville grumbled, edging back a few steps. Harry laughed. "Don't worry, Sirius isn't like Lockhart. He's not a fraud." Sirius plucked a Cornish pixie from the cage, aimed his wand, and called, "Remember the counterspell. Pesky pixie pester me." A faint green light flashed from his wand and struck the pixie, which deflated instantly into a lumpy, wing-tucked ball. "It actually works," Seamus breathed. "I thought that spell was made up by Lockhart." Sirius scanned the students. "Who wants to try first?" Harry shot his hand up faster than Hermione. With Harry's example, the rest of the students followed more confidently. One by one, they cast the counterspell. Even Neville succeeded. The first defense against the dark arts lesson ended quickly and on a high note. The students left chattering about the Ministry's investigation into the Chamber of Secrets. Harry stayed behind to help Sirius put the pixies away. "Class went well," Harry said, throwing the last pixie back into its cage. He looked at Sirius's drawn face. "You don't look well. Are you all right?" Sirius pressed his chapped lips together and gave a humorless laugh. "I don't know. I can't quite believe I'm actually a professor. I kept having nightmares all night, but I can't remember them properly." 229. Alienation of Power. Logically, the Ministry of Magic should have sent people to investigate the Chamber of Secrets during the Christmas holidays. If the students had been allowed to see the results of the inquiry as soon as school resumed, the whole matter would have been less explosive than it was now. Instead, the ministry had waited until term started, then arrived with all the pomp and circumstance of a public spectacle. Loren guessed the approval process for ministry field missions must be painfully slow. After defense against the dark arts, Loren and Hermione went along with the crowd into Myrtle's bathroom, watching students take turns squeezing into the grimy pipes. The drain was wide enough for only one person at a time, so the small bathroom swelled with students waiting to jump down. I only remember these huge, terrifying yellow eyes. It was dreadful. Myrtle's excited voice came from the back cubicle. Loren and Hermione pushed their way to the far stall and opened the door. A young Auror stood in the center of the cubicle, while Myrtle perched on the toilet tank, evidently being questioned. The Auror nodded to them, but neither sent them away nor spoke at length. He gave off an air of resigned competence that Loren couldn't help but notice. "You're here," Myrtle crowed, circling them and clasping her hands to her chest. "I'm so happy. This bathroom hasn't been this lively since I died." "It wasn't lively when you were alive either," Loren pointed out. "Don't mind him, Myrtle," Hermione said, nudging Loren. "What are you doing here?" "This Auror is asking me about where I died." Myrtle beamed with importance. "You see, it was right here, this very cubicle." The ministry was questioning witnesses and anyone connected to the events. Loren thought that he and Hermione, having not been directly involved in the basilisk incident or in confronting Voldemort, were unlikely to be summoned. After saying goodbye to Myrtle, they followed the others down into the chamber to see the investigation for themselves. At the end of the stone tunnel, ministry officials had formed a cordon. Students pressed against the barrier, forming a second ring of onlookers. In the center lay the enormous shed skin of the basilisk, well over 20 feet long, its girth as thick as an oak trunk. Light picked out a greenish sheen on the desiccated scales. Even as an empty shell, its massive shape was terrifying. Most students leaned forward to see every inch. A few timid ones peered briefly and retreated. "This is just the shed skin," Ron was saying, arms wide. "The real basilisk would be even bigger, at least 40 feet, I reckon." The crowd's imagination inflated as his gestures suggested an even greater monster. Then how did you kill it? Seamus asked incredulously. Good question, Ron said with mock modesty, and launched into a dramatic, detailed account of how he, Harry, and the others had faced Voldemort and slain the basilisk. He narrated with such flourish that Seamus blurted, "Sounds like Harry did it all. What were you doing?" Ron, bristling like a wounded lion, fixed him with a glare. What sort of thing is that? If I hadn't had his back, how would Harry have got the chance to kill it? Loren and Hermione listened from the side and exchanged secret smiles. Seeing only ordinary ministry officials examining the shed skin, the two of them moved deeper into the chamber. Near the Slytherin statue, there were only a few black bloodstains. The more obvious spectacle had drawn most of the crowd away. Ministry investigators were scattered through the dark, murmuring to one another and inspecting faint traces. The only loud voices came from the foot of the Slytherin statue. "Albus, did you really see him? You know who?" A short, stout, middle-aged man with a messy gray shock of hair asked Dumbledore. Hermione whispered, "That's the Minister for Magic, Cornelius Fudge." Fudge was as Loren remembered, pinstriped suit, bright red tie, and conspicuous purple-pointed boots. Beside him stood a small, round woman in pink from head to toe, a knitted pink hat, a soft pink Chanel-style jacket, an A-line pink skirt, and pink heels. Her girlish smile, somehow clinging to a slightly aged face, made Loren's skin crawl. He recognized her at once, Dolores Umbridge. "She looks like a pink toad," Loren muttered to Hermione. "Do girls really think that outfit looks youthful?" "No way," Hermione snapped under her breath. Percy, nearby, overheard and scolded them earnestly. "Don't say that. That is Miss Dolores Umbridge. She's about to be promoted to Senior Undersecretary of the Ministry of Magic. To have achieved such a position at her age, she must be very capable," Percy added with an odd note of reverence. "What?" Hermione exploded. "She's the Umbridge who drafted the anti-werewolf legislation?" "Humph, that figures." Hermione's attention narrowed on Umbridge. Her eyes were fixed as if trying to read the woman through and through. Loren slipped in front of Hermione and guided her a few steps into the shadow of a pillar so she could watch without being seen. He glanced at Percy and felt a pang of pity. Already before graduating, Percy had been touched by the corruption of bureaucracy. At the foot of the statue, Dumbledore spoke calmly. "I hope you understand, Cornelius. Lord Voldemort has been defeated. There is no longer a need to fear him. You can call him by his name." Fudge fumbled with his handkerchief, awkwardly wiping phantom sweat from his brow. "As you say, that person is gone, so how could he possibly return?" He stammered, then forced himself into a more measured tone. "Albus, it's not that I do not believe you, but as Minister for Magic, I have a responsibility to the public. Spreading unverified information will cause panic." He spoke at length about the duty he owed the people, how mothers would worry about husbands going out at night, how Diagon Alley shopkeepers would be on edge, and tried to make Dumbledore seem reckless. Dumbledore's deep blue eyes, however, were quietly severe. He stared until Fudge looked away, then said slowly, "Cornelius, you already know the answer in your heart. But consider, aside from Lord Voldemort, who, 50 years ago, could have opened the Chamber of Secrets?" Fudge's thoughts went to one place. Dumbledore would take his job. Beads of sweat broke out on his forehead. Dumbledore's prestige, supported by the Wizengamot and the public, dwarfed Fudge's. If Dumbledore were to declare Voldemort's return, some would inevitably see it as a sign that someone with greater authority was needed at the ministry. Fudge glanced at Umbridge. She offered a small, encouraging look, and he steadied himself. Perhaps he left instructions on how to open the chamber in an old book in a classroom, waiting for some student to stumble upon it this year, Fudge suggested. After all, he hasn't appeared in a decade. If he could do this, why would he wait so long? Loren, listening, began to understand Fudge. If Fudge were an ordinary wizard, he might have acted boldly against danger. But as minister, his fear of losing power had warped his judgment. He suspected Dumbledore of scheming to usurp him. Short-sighted and calculating, Fudge was a petty man who had happened to obtain authority. Dumbledore's disappointment in him was measured. He had once thought Fudge an adequate, if vain and power-conscious choice for minister. He had underestimated how power could corrupt. "I suppose that could be," Dumbledore sighed. "Please excuse me. I have many letters from parents to answer." Oh, of course, your busyness is quite understandable, Fudge said eagerly, watching Dumbledore depart, relieved. Their conversation didn't go unnoticed by the students. As Dumbledore walked away, a seventh-year Gryffindor stepped forward, uncertain. Headmaster Dumbledore, sorry, Lord Voldemort. Does he really have something to do with the Chamber of Secrets and the Basilisk? Dumbledore's face warmed at the boy's willingness to say the name. Mr. Xavier, he answered kindly, that is for you to decide. He glanced around at the assembled students, all of whom questioned the same thing, and smiled gently. The scene is before you and the witnesses are your classmates. You have both the ability and the right to judge for yourselves. I only ask that you choose what you believe to be true. With that, he nodded and walked away. Percy stood frozen. He was a young man whose thirst for power had begun to grow, but had not yet been mired in political maneuvering. On one hand was the beloved headmaster. On the other, the minister he admired. One eyewitness was his brother Ron. Percy's rational mind kept returning to the facts. The clearer things became, the more shaken he felt. Students began to argue in small groups. Who should we believe? We should believe Dumbledore. He has no reason to lie. The Ministry has no reason to lie either. The debate swirled. Fudge watched the scene with a grave expression, but switched to a comforting smile when students looked his way. An Auror in neat attire leaned toward Umbridge and whispered something. Her smile brightened. She cleared her throat and, with deliberate clarity, addressed the students loudly enough for all to hear. Minister Fudge, aside from the traces of a giant serpent's bite, the evidence suggests only a low-level duel took place. The spells used were relatively common charms. We found no traces of the killing curse. Fudge visibly relaxed and, adopting an overly solemn tone, replied, I believe that proves it wasn't you-know-who. His signature is the killing curse, is it not? The performance was clumsy and transparent, but it had its effect. Some students' opinions began to tilt toward the Ministry. Fudge, with Umbridge at his side, walked among them, smiling and speaking in reassuring tones. You remind me of my days at Hogwarts, he said. Cherish them. These will be the easiest and most joyful years of your lives for a long time to come. A Slytherin asked him directly, Minister Fudge, what is the truth about the Chamber of Secrets and the Basilisk? Has that person returned? Fudge laughed and dodged. I can't tell you yet. The details will be published in the Daily Prophet once the investigation concludes. Umbridge gave a soft, sweet chuckle. From the evidence so far, the answer is no, she said. But Harry saw it himself, a voice protested. That happens, Fudge said, offering a patronizing example as if reminiscing. When I was your age, I too exaggerated to get attention. Loren and Hermione had already slipped away and couldn't hear the rest. In the chamber, the minister and his assistant continued to speak, their tone casual but their message clear, subtly undermining Harry and Dumbledore. Although Hermione had been gritting her teeth and imagining chopping Fudge and Umbridge into pieces to feed Fluffy while listening to their nonsense, she calmed quickly once she was out of earshot. Feeling a tug on her robes, she turned to see Loren watching her as if she had something to say but was holding back. She opened her mouth, hesitated, and finally said, I have some questions about Animagus that I need to ask Professor McGonagall. You go on with the tour. I'll catch up. She started to leave. You really look like you have a problem. Loren reached out and grabbed her robe, suspiciously. Aren't we reviewing what we learned last semester? What new questions do you have? Hermione froze. She looked at Loren. His expression seemed to say, You're not right. You're very not right. She blinked and tried to invent a question to get by, but she wasn't good at lying, so she gave up on an excuse. She tugged at the corner of her robe, twisted it a few times, and slipped free of his grasp. Oh, never mind. I just have questions for Professor McGonagall, that's all. Hey, you're acting strange today. Loren reached for her robe again, unwilling to let her go. Hermione decided not to argue. She pushed him back firmly until he was pressed against the stone tunnel wall. She shoved hard a few times, as if trying to pin him there so he couldn't follow. The force left him stunned and dazed. She let go and, adopting a stern look, instructed him, Stay put. Don't ask too many questions. She muttered under her breath as she walked away, nagging. Loren watched her rapidly receding back, head tilted, his mind full of questions. A few nearby wizards had noticed and were casting amused glances. Loren decided not to pursue it. Everyone had a secret or two. He squeezed into the crowd gathered around the basilisk skin. On the outer ring stood curious onlookers. Inside, Ministry employees took measurements and collected evidence. Professor Snape stood close by, slowly pacing the perimeter of the skin to make sure nothing belonging to Hogwarts disappeared. With nothing urgent to do, Loren fell into step beside Snape and listened. Insatiable, Snape hissed with disgust, his gaze warning the Ministry men not to interfere. That Cornelius Fudge is no different from those pure-blood families. After Millicent Bagnold resigned in 1990, Barty Crouch lost his chance because of his Death Eater son, and Dumbledore refused to stand. Fudge slipped in and took office. 1990? So he hasn't been in office long, Loren said. That's the absurd part, Snape replied with a smirk. At first, he could only keep the Ministry running with Dumbledore's backing. He had to ask Dumbledore's opinion on everything. Someone even called him Dumbledore's yes man. Snape's look was venomous. Loren couldn't help a smile. All this about Fudge being young, clinging to Dumbledore's support, and now acting as if he could rule forever. Snape's scorn made sense. Later, those pure-blood families flattered him, and he came to believe he was indispensable. Snape went on. If only Dumbledore had chosen differently. When a Ministry employee moved to cut a large piece of basilisk skin, Snape lit a flash of warning charm. It had no power, only a sharp glow that halted the man's hand. The junior employee flushed and bent to continue measuring, dutifully taking samples no larger than a fingernail. I've already given them a box of scales, a box of flesh, and a box of bones, Snape sneered. Now they want to take the whole hide. Can the school refuse? Loren asked. Of course, Snape said. What do you think Professor McGonagall has been doing? Even the Board of Governors can no longer interfere in things that affect the school directly. Their conversation drifted on to more mundane topics. The application of Sectum Sempra, the possible medicinal value of basilisk materials. Meanwhile, Hermione made her way to the Transfiguration professor's office. When she pushed open the door, McGonagall was replying to a stack of parents' letters. A pile of envelopes made that obvious. After spending time around Loren, Hermione had grown a touch more casual. Seeing McGonagall put down her quill, she asked, "Replying to letters? Does the headmaster really reply to all the parents every term?" McGonagall's breath quickened. She restrained an eye roll. Dumbledore? Replying to letters? When has he ever replied to parents' letters? Unless a letter is addressed to him, he passes them all to me. Hermione shrank back, feeling she'd overstepped. McGonagall calmed, and after a moment said kindly, "Is there something you need, Miss Granger?" Hermione lowered her head, twisted the corner of her robe, and whispered, "Professor, I want to learn apparition." "Apparition!" McGonagall exploded. Her nostrils flared. "How could you possibly think I would allow you to flout Ministry regulations and practice apparition privately before you're 17? It's dangerous." The rebuke killed the little courage Hermione had. If it had been another professor, she might have argued, but this was McGonagall. She respected her too much. Hermione hung her head and muttered, But. "It must be Mr. Morgan who put you up to this, right?" McGonagall said. Hermione looked up in surprise. How did McGonagall know? Of course, how could she not? McGonagall continued dryly, "Phileas was misled. He listened to Morgan and thought I had suggested Morgan should seek him out to learn apparition." "Huh?" Hermione blinked. It sounded exactly like something Loren would do. But why?" she stammered. "Because of Dumbledore," McGonagall said. "When he found out, he told Phileas and me to let it be. At his insistence, we did not pursue Morgan's mischief." McGonagall sighed as she thought of the two troublemakers, one elderly and one young, one daring, the other cleaning up the mess. Hermione asked weakly, "Then, can I still learn apparition?" McGonagall looked at her until Hermione understood the answer without words. "Oh." Hermione's hope died quietly. McGonagall sighed and tried to comfort her. "Don't worry. When you're of age, there will be special apparition classes. You'll learn in a few weeks." "I have something else," Hermione said, forcing herself to move on. "I'd like to see Headmaster Dumbledore. I have something important to tell him." McGonagall eyed her suspiciously. Anyone overhearing would assume Hermione wanted special permission to learn apparition. Hermione, listen. Morgan is unusual, but apparition isn't the magic for you to be meddling with yet. Be patient. It isn't about apparition, Hermione said quickly. It's about the new Professor Black. Professor Black? Is something wrong with him? McGonagall asked, puzzled. Hermione avoided her gaze. I can't say yet. I want to tell Dumbledore first. McGonagall nodded. Relieved to pass the matter to the headmaster, she led Hermione out, and they moved down the third-floor corridor. They turned a corner and stopped before a hideous stone gargoyle. McGonagall said the password, sherbet lemon, and the gargoyle sprang aside. The wall split, revealing a spiral staircase whose steps moved like an escalator. Hermione had heard Loren mention it, but this was the first time she rode it under McGonagall's guidance. They rose and rose, finally arriving at a glittering oak door. McGonagall lifted the griffin-shaped brass knocker and rapped. The door opened without sound. Inside, Dumbledore's office was a wide, circular room full of cheerful oddities. Curious silver instruments whirred and puffed tiny clouds of smoke. Portraits of past headmasters snored gently in their frames. The Sorting Hat sat quietly on a shelf, and Fawkes perched on a gilded stand. While Hermione took it all in, McGonagall spoke a few words to Dumbledore and then left them alone. Hermione didn't notice how long she had been staring before she became aware of Dumbledore smiling at her from behind his desk. There was none of the disappointment he'd shown Cornelius Fudge in the Chamber of Secrets. This was Hermione's first private meeting with him. Although they'd spoken in the infirmary before, she still felt nervous. Dumbledore gestured for her to sit, picked up a teapot, and poured her a cup of something with a twinkle in his voice. You are unlike Loren. The first time he came here, the first thing he noticed was me, not the furnishings. There was an inexplicable hint of jealousy in his tone. Hermione's nerves eased a good deal. She took the teacup he offered and sipped. Sweet. She took another sip, sweet and a little cloying. Dumbledore chuckled. I should have asked what you preferred to drink. I also have juice, milk, black tea, butterbeer. That's fine, Hermione cut in hastily. She had come to say something, not linger over tea. Dumbledore winked. The secret is plenty of sugar cubes and honey. Loren likes it too. Apparently, I'm not too old to be out of touch with young people's tastes, am I? Hermione nodded reluctantly. Thinking of Loren's cryptic behavior and his private meetings with Dumbledore, she asked, when was the first time Loren came here? Probably the first night after the sorting. He noticed something suspicious about Peter Pettigrew. The rat Scabbers, Dumbledore answered. Earlier than she'd thought. Hermione found Dumbledore easier to talk to than she'd expected, and she asked another question, a little cautiously. That day at Hagrid's hut, what were you and Loren talking about? If it's a secret, you don't have to tell me, she added quickly. Dumbledore smiled and rummaged in a drawer for sweets. No need to be nervous. It's not classified. If Loren were here, he'd tell you himself. He produced a box, swapping cockroach clusters for licorice wands, and offered them to Hermione. We were researching a way to deal with the basilisk's eyes. Hermione's hand trembled as she took a sweet, staring at him. What? Several licorice wands clattered onto the table. You, Loren, you both knew about the basilisk? Her voice was barely a whisper. Dumbledore picked up one of the sweets, bit into it with a soft crunch, and waited for her to take it in. He had thought it through carefully before telling her. He had feared Loren might be manipulated by Voldemort, lured toward darkness, using sacred objects, and perhaps even the Philosopher's Stone for the wrong reasons. Using Hermione, appealing to the goodness he believed lay in Loren's heart, was the best way to keep him grounded. Dumbledore trusted that Loren carried a bright light inside him, but his disappointment in Fudge and in his own choices had made him cautious. The basilisk's gaze is too dangerous, Dumbledore said softly. I was trying to find a way to keep its petrifying power without the life-taking aspect. No wonder all the victims had been petrified instead of killed. Memories of visiting Filch, questioning Myrtle, brewing polyjuice potion, and investigating with Loren flashed through Hermione's mind and settled on one scene, the first dueling club activity. She had just finished squaring off with Millicent Bulstrode when Loren had been helping straighten her robes. He'd asked, almost casually, Are you sure you pulled the hair from her head? You didn't make a mistake, did you? You didn't make a mistake, did you? You didn't make a mistake, did you? The thought screamed through Hermione's head. He knew. He knew everything. He'd known all along. Heat and a sharp embarrassment flared in her chest, blending with fury so fierce she wanted to strike him. She pictured Loren with a sudden urge to punch him, hard. Beside her, Dumbledore idly bit off a piece of licorice wand, completely at ease. The sound of candy cracking pulled Hermione back to the present, and she mustered her courage to ask, "But why? Why? If you knew there was a basilisk in the school, didn't you restrain it? Why did you let it rampage? Why didn't you step in and clear things up when Harry was being misunderstood?" Hermione fired off a barrage of questions, her emotions rising until her throat went dry. She instinctively raised her cup and took a gulp of the sugar water, then grimaced at its sweetness. Her throat still felt raw, and though she tried to keep her face serious, the sight was almost comical. Dumbledore suppressed a smile, picked up the teapot again, and poured her another cup. "Black tea," he said. "It will help your throat." Steam rose from the cup with the familiar, soothing aroma. This time it wasn't sugar water. Hermione felt the seriousness of her question keenly, but her throat felt too sore to protest. She raised the cup and drank, fixing Dumbledore with a hard look as she set it down. "Don't change the subject," she said. "You have to explain." Dumbledore's shoulders drooped slightly, his brows sagging at the corners in a sudden, fragile display of age. He spoke with a wistful helplessness. "Many years ago, I watched Lord Voldemort gather the Death Eaters and tear the wizarding world apart. I received news daily of innocents murdered. People said I was the only one who could stop him. But I couldn't stop him, Hermione." His voice was weak, trembling. Hermione's heart lurched. She stammered out, "Headmaster, no, don't say that. We all know you are the most powerful wizard. Voldemort feared you. You protected so many." Dumbledore waved a hand. "I have never considered myself the most powerful. Perhaps when I was younger, with some small talents and a little luck, I gained a reputation. But now I am old." He paused and met her eyes. "You must be wondering what this has to do with the basilisk." Hermione swallowed and nodded. "Voldemort has been dormant for 10 years, Dumbledore went on. His small acts of interference have been growing bolder. Hermione, you are a clever girl. Can you not see? He is not gone. He is coming back." 12 years ago, Harry thwarted Voldemort, Dumbledore said, and that won him respect, and, in Voldemort's eyes, revenge. I hoped Harry would grow quickly, learn to survive, and be able to withstand Voldemort's persecution. Hearing that, many of Hermione's earlier questions fell into place. After a moment's thought, she said, "So it was like the first year. You thought Harry needed to face difficult things to learn. You let him learn. This year, was the basilisk attack planned to force a confrontation too?" Dumbledore admitted it calmly. "Yes. Loren revealed to me, accidentally, that Harry could speak Parseltongue. Under my guidance, some people became suspicious of Harry. That was deliberate. I wanted him to learn. Strength of mind and strength in magic both matter." Hermione's anger flared anew. She still thought it wrong. But what about Colin and Justin? They were innocent, attacked by the basilisk and left in the hospital for months. Isn't that unfair? Dumbledore's face was solemn. "I see that now. It was a mistake. For Colin Creevey and Justin Finch Fletchley, I will do what I can to earn their forgiveness." Hermione had nothing more to say and sat back sullen. Dumbledore, admiring the girl's earnestness, did not let the silence stretch. He opened a drawer, took out a box of lemon sherbets, and pushed it towards her. "Professor McGonagall said you wanted to talk to me about Professor Black. Is something wrong with him?" Hermione straightened, drawing her thoughts back from the recent conversation. Professor," she said more composedly, "I have a feeling there's some sort of entanglement between Loren and Professor Black." The sherbet sat untouched while Dumbledore listened to Hermione's description of the signs. He didn't think she was imagining things. His thick fingers tapped the desk once. After a long pause, he said slowly, "I will look into it. If anything develops, I will tell you." Seeing Hermione take him seriously made him smile. "Don't worry. I don't think Loren would attempt to cook and eat his Defense Against the Dark Arts professor in the school, would he?" Hermione couldn't help a small chuckle. "About today's conversation," she said. "I suppose this is our little secret, yes?" Dumbledore winked at her. "So you won't even speak of the basilisk?" she asked, disappointed. Preferably not, he replied. Reluctantly, Hermione agreed. She did not want to keep it a secret. She wanted to march up to Loren and give him a good scolding, but she met Dumbledore's gaze and yielded. Although she had learned something vital, her plans for the day felt thwarted. She turned to go, dejected, when Dumbledore's voice called from behind her. Also, Professor McGonagall has a great deal of schoolwork at the moment. Take my note. Ask Professor Flitwick to teach you apparition. Really? Hermione looked up, surprised. Thank you, Professor. After she left, Fawkes, who had been preening under his wing, lifted his head and chirped a reproachful note. Dumbledore made a pained face. What do you mean? How can you accuse me of deceiving a child? I didn't lie. In the headmaster's office, Fawkes chirped in reply. Back at Hogwarts, Christmas homework wasn't collected until the professor resumed lessons, which left a gap that Harry and Ron had used to perform their own brand of miracle working. In a corner of the library by the window, they wrote so fast their handwriting looked like a banshee's claws. Ron admired his cleverness. He'd written the herbology essay at 1.5 line spacing, and Harry finished about the same time. They exchanged a knowing smile. Everything was understood without words. After the basilisk incident, their minds were unburdened, and they'd been too busy over the holidays to touch their assignments. Neville peered over, reading Ron's title aloud, The Care and Growth Process of Mandrakes in Autumn and Winter. Then he read Harry's, The Cultivation and Maturation Process of Mandrakes in Spring and Summer. Finally, he noticed another densely written essay lying between theirs, Biological Characteristics and Effect Analysis of Mandrakes. He could only stare. You two split Hermione's essay into 2 others? Harry smiled sheepishly. Luna, her face buried in a curiously shaped book titled 100 Unsolved Mysteries of the Magical World, looked up and declared, Brilliant idea! You two should work for my father's paper when you leave school. He's always worried about content. He'd love you. Ron puffed up with pride. Ginny, standing nearby, thought bringing Luna had been a mistake and quickly steered her away. Neville warned gravely, Be careful Professor Sprout doesn't find out. She'll have you repotting mandrakes and coaxing them to sleep. The thought of tending mandrakes made Harry and Ron shudder. It's written, Harry said, patting his chest. Let's leave it at that. Exactly, Ron agreed. We're not rewriting anything. Buoyed by mutual courage, they moved on to the next subject. Hermione had watched the whole farce, her eyes fixed on Harry. Dumbledore's words, strength of mind, strength of magic, echoed in her head. She was puzzled. Did what Dumbledore had said really apply to the Harry sitting there? She couldn't see any extraordinary strength at all. Loren's voice broke through her thoughts. Hermione, he nudged her shoulder. Why have you been so distracted these last 2 days? Didn't you sleep well last night? Nothing. Hermione answered dryly. She wanted to bring up their conversation with Dumbledore and belt Loren, but she kept reminding herself of the headmaster's warning. Torn between wanting to scold and wanting to keep the secret, she couldn't focus on her book. Just seeing Loren made her anxious. By the way, he continued, why do you smell of essence of murtlap? Where are you hurt? Before he could finish, Hermione froze. Oh no, she'd forgotten that Loren's potions grades were always outstanding, and that his nose was even more sensitive than Fang's. Yesterday, when she'd been practicing apparition with Professor Flitwick, Flitwick had insisted on using essence of murtlap as a precaution against splinching. She hadn't expected it to still be detectable a day later. Flustered, she blurted, No splinching. It was just a precaution. What's splinching? Hermione nearly bit her tongue. Her mind raced. What's splinching? You must have misheard. Lavender bumped her head on a bedpost last night, and Madame Pomfrey used essence of murtlap. That's why I still smell of it. Is that so? Loren drew the words out skeptically, the raised eyebrow spelling disbelief. Hermione put a hand on his brow to steady him and said firmly, What is there to doubt? Her fingers were warm and smooth against his face. The faint medicinal scent of the murtlap mixed with the detergent on her robes and only deepened Loren's confusion. He opened his mouth, then stopped. Why so many questions? No more questions. Oh, he settled for the moment. That Wednesday afternoon was packed, the Animagus exam and History of Magic. It was the first History of Magic class after the holiday, and second years had to hand in their Christmas homework, 3 essays on 3-inch parchments. One by one, the students placed their parchments on Professor Binns's lectern. Only Ron sat on his hands, nervously clutching his paper. For herbology, Ron had been economical, 1.5 spacing, but for Professor Binns, who seemed somewhat out of touch, he'd been bold and used double spacing. The Gryffindors admired his nerve. If Binns accepted it, they'd half the work for future history assignments. Writing the cheeky paper had been one thing, handing it to the professor was another. Ron lacked the nerve, until finally he didn't. Harry, Seamus, Dean, and the others gathered around, egging him on. "Come on, Ron, hand it in. You're making history. If you succeed, your name will be carved on the Gryffindor fireplace, immortal." Time dragged, and then, with trembling legs, Ron stood up. A sudden rush of courage surged through him. He strode to the front and placed his parchment on top of the stack, holding his head high. Professor Binns's perpetually expressionless, ghostly face twitched almost imperceptibly as he looked at the new submission, but the class returned to its usual hypnotic hush. Ron sat down like a hero. The others tried to dampen their excitement and began whispering, "Weasley is our king! Weasley is our king!" Hermione glanced at Harry, who was smiling along with the others, and thought only, "Headmaster Dumbledore, I'm afraid you entrusted the wrong person with this task." Loren, sitting at the same table, watched the commotion with obvious enjoyment. He had no deeper thoughts on the matter. He usually did the bare minimum for any assignment, except potions where too little meant extra work from Snape, so his attention wandered during Binns's lecture. Bored, he began fiddling with the school crest sewn on Hermione's robe sleeve. The crest, a sturdy item made by Madame Malkins, didn't fray or come loose, but the occasional click under his fingernail made Hermione's expression go flat. History of Magic always had this effect. If she didn't keep Loren awake, he'd pick at her until she did. She couldn't very well get up and thump him in front of the professor, so after a series of small compromises, they'd reached a truce. Still, Loren wasn't content to merely fidget with the crest. He took the chance to whisper, "How's your animagus revision going? Confident?" Hermione concentrated on the lecture, pretending not to hear. Loren poked her arm. "What did you ask Professor McGonagall when you saw her? Can you give me a quick lesson?" She kept her eyes on the front and said nothing. He poked her cheek next, the soft flesh, rough fingernail. Hermione jabbed him in the chest. "Listen to the lecture properly. Why so many questions?" Loren made a face and settled down. 5 minutes later, the crest began to click again. Loren was pretty confident about the animagus exam. Hermione had dragged him through revision all through the holidays, quizzing him, filling in gaps, so he'd reviewed everything that could be reviewed more than once. That was why he was a little surprised, 2 days before the exam, when Hermione wanted to ask Professor McGonagall for help. The Transfiguration Club had handled precedents before, but there had never been a formal animagus exam. The students taking it were all club members with solid foundations. Loren guessed the exam might be harder than usual. After History of Magic, Seamus and Dean and the others who didn't have to take the test went off to play. Loren and the rest had someone carry their textbooks back to the Gryffindor common room while they hurried to the exam hall. Summoning, vanishing, transfiguration, Hermione rattled off, breathless and precise. Dew, saliva, death's head moth. Amato, animo, animato, animagus. As always, she was firing through lists of nouns and terms, half excited and half nervous. She'd reviewed everything she could, but she was still afraid of missing something. Next to her, Neville clutched his red remembrall and muttered whatever he could dredge up, reciting from start to finish in a thin voice. The two of them sounded like they were casting a tightening charm, and it made Harry and Ron, who hadn't studied as much, groan. Loren, who'd been unusually drowsy after the previous lesson, leaned against the corridor wall and yawned. Draco, the Weasley twins, Percy and Penelope, Cedric, Marcus, and a few others were waiting there too. The older students stuck in small composed groups, talking about anything but the exam. When the bell rang, everyone filed into the exam room and sat in silence. Blank parchments and anti-cheating quills threaded with silver were handed out, the same as for finals. The paper focused on animagus-related knowledge, with a few questions on the basic principles of human transfiguration. The difficulty was moderate, and it examined the theoretical application of transfiguration and some subtle points. For Loren, it wasn't hard. He finished the basic section in under an hour of the 3-hour sitting. The last questions required case analysis and careful listing of points, which took longer. The final large question caught his eye. The reading for it took more than half a page, and the prompt was vague, almost like an essay. It asked them to read The Tale of Babbity Rabbity and Her Cackling Stump carefully, analyze the witch's use of animagus, and point out instances in the story that didn't conform to the rules of animagus. The passage was provided at the end. It didn't feel like a question Professor McGonagall would have set, more like something Dumbledore might have written. Why did it seem familiar? Like the Christmas gift Dumbledore had once given him, The Wizard and the Hopping Pot Collector's Edition, this story came from the Tales of Beetle the Bard. Because of the Good Fortune Spring and the Hopping Pot, Loren had gone through all the stories in that little book and read a few scholarly takes. Most reviews dwelled on symbolism, the wizard tricking the Muggle king, Beetle's social context, and Beetle's attitudes toward Muggles and pureblood society. Commentators rarely treated animagus magic seriously. To transform smoothly and naturally required long study and practice, and many wizards felt their time was better spent elsewhere. The question itself wasn't difficult. Babbity's obvious use of animagus was turning into a rabbit to hide in a tree stump while being pursued. 2 points violated animagus rules. A transformed animal cannot speak, and an animagus does not gain the ability to perform magic while in animal form. Loren wrote those 2 points neatly, then dropped his quill into the inkwell. He nearly handed his paper in early, but a stern look from Professor McGonagall made him sit back down. He idly looked around. Hermione, a few seats to his front right, was still writing with intense concentration. Knowing her, she wanted to record every possible point, and her meticulous handwriting slowed her down. Cedric and Percy were in comparable positions but moved a little faster. Neville was only halfway through, but wasn't stuck long on any one question. The surprise was Harry and Ron. They'd finished and were just sitting, looking left and right like Loren. After the exam, they walked out together. Loren clapped his hands on Harry's and Ron's shoulders. "I didn't expect it. You two beat Hermione." Harry scratched his head, embarrassed. "No, there were big chunks I left blank. I couldn't remember things, so I just sat there staring." Turning to Ron, he said with a little pride, "I put my quill down before Harry did." It was Friday afternoon, their second herbology class of term, and the only herbology lesson that afternoon. The previous one had been theory and holiday homework collection. This was their first time in the greenhouse this term. The Gryffindor and Hufflepuff students waited outside the third greenhouse door, hoping Professor Sprout would be pleased and let them go early so they'd have time to play near the edge of the forbidden forest. Harry and Ron trotted nervously by the door. Convinced Professor Sprout had already read their essays, and today's lesson would decide whether they got a scolding. Professor Sprout unlocked the greenhouse with a key thick as her arm and pushed the door open. A blast of fermenting compost and damp earth hit them. The greenhouse had been sealed all holiday, and the trapped gases made a pressure difference that sent little gusts outward. "Oh," the students groaned. Amid the collective complaint, Harvey and Ron were snorting with suppressed laughter, shoulders shaking. Loren stared. "Do you actually like this smell?" he asked. "No," Harry managed between laughs. "But Professor Sprout didn't say anything about our essays, so they must have been okay." Inside, strange plants swayed slowly. Compared to the start of last term, their movements were lethargic. Many herbaceous plants were hibernating, roots sunk in the soil. Loren felt a wave of drowsiness from them, like a plant-induced lull. The Abyssinian shrivelfig seedlings they were to work on had some winter-damaged branches that needed to be pruned, and they also had to gather enough grass for the compost outside. The awful smells made everyone hurry to finish the pruning and get into the fresh air. Seamus attacked a seedling with his shears as if possessed, clipping yellow and green branches alike so quickly it was a blur. Dean couldn't even pick up the fallen leaves before the next seedling was being ravaged. Neville watched, mouth opening, but couldn't get a word in. Nearby, Harry and Ron were doing the same over-enthusiastic pruning. Neville finally said weakly. Professor said to only prune the withered branches. I know, Harry said shortly, snipping more decisively. Loren and Hermione were different, fast but meticulous, following instructions exactly. Neville comforted himself that maybe a fig seedling with fewer side branches would grow better. He resolved to come regularly to water and feed them. By the time they moved on to collecting grass for the compost, over half the shrivel figs in the 2 beds had been stripped bare, shaved down to a single main branch. The first task had been done too thoroughly and too quickly, which made the second task a leisurely one. Students from both houses took turns throwing clumps of grass into the compost pit. On the lawn by the greenhouse, Loren, Hermione, Harry, Ron, and Rolf sat in a loose circle around a tiny bowtruckle. The little green creature, made of twigs and leaves, hid behind a blade of grass and matched the ground so well it was almost invisible. Loren tried to coax it out with strands of tender grass. Rolf said dryly, I told you bowtruckles eat small insects. I know, you also said they're omnivorous, Loren replied. But I tasted this grass. Its roots are sweet. That statement packed a lot of information and silenced everyone. Hermione looked at him with a complicated expression. Did you find this sweet grass right away, or have you tasted many kinds of grass? Loren didn't answer. They were chuckling when a chubby boy with golden hair and a prominent nose approached. The bowtruckle heard him first and darted into Loren's sleeve, peeking out with a tiny head. Ernie Macmillan squatted in front of Harry, took a deep breath as if he'd prepared this sentence for ages, and said very formally, I just want to say, Harry, I'm sorry. I once doubted you. I apologize for anything idiotic I've said before, and I hope you'll forgive me. Ernie held out a short, chubby hand. Harry shook it. You know what? You picked a good time. I'm in a very good mood. Professor Sprout didn't scold me for my essay. Ernie relaxed into a smile. Ron, less ready to forgive, muttered, You're quick-witted, aren't you? Ernie ignored that and sat beside Hannah. The bowtruckle stayed in Loren's sleeve, and a mischievous hand kept poking its little face with a blade of grass. Rolf, always more mature than some of his housemates, didn't have much to do with Ernie, who liked to gossip. He was more friends with Justin, who was still in the hospital. A slight awkwardness fell over the group. What were you two talking about? Hannah asked. She and Loren weren't strangers. She'd been the one with the frozen pears incident. We were saying the roots of this grass are sweet, Loren said, pulling a fresh clump free, peeling away the dirty outer layers, and handing a root to her. Hannah, an open sort, believed him, popped it in her mouth and sucked. It really is sweet, she said, surprised. Try some too. Loren handed another large, soil-covered handful to Ernie. Ernie's face fell. He didn't take the grass. I still have to help with the composting. I'll go. He fled. Ron snorted a little laugh, then checked himself when he saw Hannah. She only chuckled softly. I'm looking for Neville, she said. Do you know where he is? There, he's cutting grass over there. Hermione turned to Loren and patted his shoulder, chiding, You little trickster, you deliberately got him to come apologize. He stayed after apologizing. Harry forgave him, so why is Ernie still hanging about? Loren said, letting the bowtruckle clamber out of his sleeve and peeking its head. Rolf rescued it from Loren's hand and, in passing, asked about the basilisk. The following is the reading passage supplied with the exam. The Tales of Beetle the Bard, Babbity-Rabbity and Her Cackling Stump. Once upon a time, in a faraway land, there lived a foolish king who decided only he should possess magic. He ordered his captain to form a witch-hunting squad and gave them a pack of fierce black hounds. He also issued proclamations across the kingdom. The king seeks a magic instructor. No true wizard dared to apply. They all avoided the witch hunters. But a crafty charlatan who knew nothing of magic saw his chance and went to the palace, claiming to be a highly skilled wizard. He performed a few simple tricks, and the foolish king believed him. The king immediately appointed him chief sorcerer and royal magic instructor. The charlatan demanded a large bag of gold to buy wands, some large rubies for healing spells, and a silver goblet or two for brewing potions. The king gave him everything. The charlatan stowed the treasures in his home, then returned to the garden. An old washerwoman named Babbity, who lived in a cottage at the garden's edge, had been watching him. Babbity made the palace sheets and linens soft and fragrant. She saw the charlatan break 2 branches from one of the king's trees before going to the palace. He handed one to the king and swore it was a powerful wand. "It will only work when you are worthy," he warned. Each morning, the charlatan and the king went into the garden, waving branches and shouting nonsense. The charlatan performed more tricks to convince the king of his skill. One morning, while they hopped and muttered, loud cackling drifted to the king's ears. Babbity was watching from her window and laughing so hard she disappeared from sight. "I must look terribly undignified to make that washerwoman laugh," the king said. He stopped hopping and frowned. "I'm tired of practicing. Sorcerer, when will I perform real spells for my subjects?" The charlatan promised wonders soon. The king declared, "Tomorrow we'll invite the courtiers to see magic." The charlatan panicked and tried to flee. "I must travel far tomorrow," he lied, but the king forbade him to leave and threatened to have his head cut off if he failed. Cornered and fearful, the charlatan peered through Babbity's window and saw the old woman polishing a wand while the palace sheets washed themselves in a tub. He realized she must be a true witch and both blamed and begged her. "Your cackling cost me my life," he roared. "If you won't help, I'll expose you." Babbity smiled and agreed to help if he would hide in the bushes while she performed the spells. "What if the king asks for a spell I don't know?" she asked. The charlatan sneered and said her magic would be enough for the king's imagination. He returned to the palace, reassured. The next morning, the nobles gathered in the garden. The king mounted a stage, the charlatan stood nearby, and Babbity hid in the bushes. "First, I shall make that lady's hat disappear," the king proclaimed. Babbity pointed her wand and made the hat vanish. The courtiers cheered. "Next, I shall make that horse fly." Babbity made the horse soar, and the court marveled. Then the captain of the witch-hunting squad ran forward. "Your Majesty, Saber ate a poisonous mushroom this morning and died. Please bring him back." He carried the largest hound's corpse onto the stage. The king pointed his branch at it, but no magic returned the dead dog. Babbity did not raise her wand, for no magic can truly bring back the dead. People whispered, then laughed, thinking the king's earlier feats were mere tricks. "Why isn't it working?" the king demanded. The charlatan, desperate, pointed at the bushes and cried, "An evil witch is blocking your magic. Seize her!" Babbity fled. The witch-hunting squad set their hounds on her scent, but she vanished into a low hedge. On the far side, they found the hounds barking around an old gnarled tree. "She turned herself into a tree," the charlatan cried. "Chop her down, Your Majesty. That's how you deal with evil witches." They felled the tree with axes. As the court prepared to leave, a loud cackling came from the stump. "Fools," Babbity's voice called from the chopped stump. "Chopping witches in half doesn't kill them. If you don't believe me, try chopping the great sorcerer in half." The captain rushed to try, but the charlatan fell to his knees, confessing his deceit. As he was dragged toward the dungeon, the stump cackled again, louder still. "By chopping a witch in half, you have brought a terrible curse upon your kingdom. From now on, every harm you inflict on witches will strike you like an axe until you wish you were dead." The king begged for mercy and promised to protect all wizards in his realm. "Very well," said the stump, "but you must also compensate Babbity." "Anything," cried the king. "You shall have a statue of Babbity erected on this spot, so the kingdom will never forget its foolishness." The king vowed to have the kingdom's finest sculptors make the statue in pure gold. Ashamed, the nobles returned to the palace, and the stump cackled behind them. When the garden was empty, a fat bearded rabbit with a wand clutched between its teeth hopped from a hole at the stump's base. Babbity hopped away into the distance, and from then on a golden statue of a washerwoman stood on that stump, and no wizard in the kingdom was ever persecuted again. 233. Harry Hart and Horcrux. The composting task was finished quickly, and after a spell of ventilation, the stench in the third greenhouse had faded considerably. When Professor Sprout gathered the students and lined them up at the greenhouse entrance, they did their best to contain their excitement, faces bright with eager smiles. It was the last lesson on a Friday. Once Professor Sprout dismissed them, they could enjoy a fun afternoon before a refreshing weekend. Professor Sprout stood in her gardening clothes and wide brown hat, hands on her hips. Some of you have been diligent with the compost and fodder, she said. I want to commend Longbottom and Abbott. Applause broke out, and everyone turned to Neville and Hannah. Neville flushed scarlet from neck to ears. Hannah beamed. Ron tilted his head, covering his mouth, and whispered, Harry, Seamus, doesn't Neville seem even shyer than before? I think so. He's gone right back to first year, Seamus drawled with a grin. Loren looked at Neville and Hannah with a teasing smirk that Hermione couldn't read. Harry frowned. Are you two exchanging secret signals with Professor Sprout? What does that mean? You must have skimmed my essay, Hermione replied disdainfully. If you'd read the end, you'd know she was talking about when the mandrakes will be mature. Loren rolled his eyes. Mature mandrakes can be used to brew the potion to awaken Colin and Justin, he reminded them. And Madame Norris, Hermione added, Filch will be pleased. Professor Sprout's gaze swept the group with a McGonagall-like sternness. But some of you have been lazy, she said, fixing Loren and a few others with a look. Hermione, Harry, Ron, Seamus, and Dean shrank back, unwilling to meet her eyes. Loren stood with that insolent not me posture, which only made the professor glare harder. Those whose names I call stay, the rest of you may go. When she called the names, Loren's smugness vanished. Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, stay. Everyone else dismissed. Yay! Seamus and Dean cheered, prancing past Harry and Ron to high-five each other. They left in triumphant, annoying fashion before Harry and Ron could reach them. Loren and Hermione lingered. Loren hadn't abandoned his friends. He wanted to see what would happen. Professor Sprout stepped up to Harry and, tapping mud from the sole of her boot with the heel of the other, asked, Do you know why I kept you two? Harry and Ron exchanged guilty looks and mumbled apologies. Sorry, Professor. We'll write our essays properly from now on, Harry said. Ron echoed the promise. Yes, Professor, we'll behave. I'll take your promises under advisement, Sprout said with a twinkle. But you must be punished. Go and take off the mandrakes, winter socks, and scarves. You know how to do it? She asked. They nodded obediently. Do you know which bed the mandrakes are in? Again they nodded. Good boys. Get to it. I'll be back to lock up before dark. She strode off toward the back greenhouse, boots thumping, musing under her breath. Once those socks are off, it'll be quick. Hermione watched the professor go, nodding thoughtfully. It's late January now. They'll be almost mature by exams. Loren nodded in the same slow, measured way. The two of them nodded with a resemblance to a certain white-bearded old man, which made Harry look between them in confusion. Are you two swapping secret signals with Professor Sprout? He asked again. You must not have read my essay, Hermione said, still cross. If you had, you'd know we were talking about mandrake maturation. She's right, Loren added. Mature mandrakes are used to make the restorative potion for Colin and Justin. And Madame Norris, Hermione repeated. We still have months until finals, Ron complained. Come on, Harry, don't forget earmuffs. This is going to be awful. Ron dragged Harry toward the mandrake beds, looking as though he were marching to his doom. Loren smiled and pulled Hermione along. Let's go. 2 people won't finish before dark. Hermione's face went suddenly flustered. I have to go to the Forbidden Forest. I arranged to meet Professor Flitwick there. She fumbled the excuse badly, worried Loren would see through it. Loren edged closer, eyes narrowing with mock suspicion. Hermione could feel his breath and felt her heart flutter. Do you want me to come with you? It's been a while since I've seen Hagrid and Fang. No. Hermione pushed him away, bright-eyed and wary like a squirrel clutching a nut. She pushed him a touch too hard. Loren rubbed his chest and grumbled. If you didn't want me to come, just say so. Do you want me to pick you up on the way back to the castle? A small spike of guilt made Hermione pat his chest quickly. No, I'll be back before dark. I'll find you all. Her lie made her uneasy, and she slipped away quickly. Loren smiled and turned into the greenhouse. Hermione had been secretive lately. Loren didn't press. Everyone deserved privacy. After all, Hermione wouldn't join Lord Voldemort. Neither would he. Weekend, Gryffindor Common Room. Most of the students were outside. The common room was quiet. Loren slumped in an armchair by the roaring fire, a copy of the Tales of Beetle the Bard over his face, breathing evenly. Inside the book, though, his mind wandered into another scene. In an alchemy lab beneath an inverted brick dome, Loren and Nicholas Flamel hunched together over an ethereal heart. light and shadow forming a projection in midair. As in The Wizard and the Hairy Heart, Flamel said, waving a hand. The heart, long sealed against sensation, shrivels and grows black hair. A once plump, crimson heart had withered like a wilting flower. Its muscles had dried and wrinkled like old bark. Dark, coarse hair sprouted from it, and a faint, putrid stink rose. Hiss! The image made Loren shudder, but he couldn't help smirking. Flamel, it's a heart, not an apple. You've read anatomy, Flamel replied. A heart shouldn't age like that. The book says it, Flamel shrugged. Magic isn't Muggle medicine. Don't try to force it into Muggle frameworks. Could a wizard keep his heart outside his body and still live? Loren asked. Don't tell me wizards can live without a heart. Of course not, Flamel said after a pause. Maybe it's allegorical. It doesn't fit with either magic as I know it or Muggle science. In my centuries, I've never seen such a thing. Loren wasn't ready to give up. The short stories in Beetle's book had proven unexpectedly literal before. The Deathly Hallows, Dumbledore's confirmations, the Animagus tale, so why not something deeper in this one? He replayed the story's details. A cold, calculating wizard, huge castle, great wealth, no grief at his parents' deaths. A witch gains his trust. He shows her the hairy heart he has sealed in a box. The heart, starved of sensation, becomes a hairy thing. The witch tells him to put it back so he can feel again. He kills her instead, then cuts out his own heart to avoid being controlled and kills himself. Servants find 2 hearts and 2 corpses. A cold, calculating wizard who sealed his emotions. The heart survives outside the body. He dies when the heart is destroyed. Loren's eyes brightened. Isn't that a Horcrux? He replaced the story's wizard in his mind with the image of Voldemort and felt no dissonance. Brilliant, emotionless, willing to commit atrocities for immortality. Flamel's interest perked. He restored the heart's hairy form, then let the outline fade until only a shadow remained. The black hair seemed to melt into rising, twisted black magic. The hairy heart may be symbolic. Substitute any container for a soul, vessel, object, and the tale still works, Flamel said. Loren clicked his tongue. If the witch was murdered to make a Horcrux, who did the wizard sacrifice? His parents. Was the witch an opportunist or an intended victim? The servants who survived, what had they seen? The tale was less simple and more sinister than it appeared. Loren watched the shadowed heart. The rising darkness reminded him of Ravenclaw's diadem. Helbo discovered how to make Horcruxes over 1,000 years ago, he said softly. Who knows how many tried it since? Flamel waved a hand and shrugged. Believe me, Loren, immortality isn't as wonderful as you imagine. Nicholas didn't want to go on after 600 years. I think he held on longer than necessary, but he never found many other truly immortal people. Loren only half listened. A real-world voice called him back. His awareness slipped from the book's projection into the common room. Flamel's voice faded, and the phantom heart dissolved into motes of light. The book was lifted off Loren's face, and someone's fingers tickled his eyelashes. He opened his eyes to find Hermione perched on the arm of his chair, flushed and laughing. The tales of Beetle the Bard set aside, and one mischievous hand still playfully poking at him. Loren clamped his teeth together with a small snap. Ah! Hermione yelped and snatched her hand away, giggling. Were you daydreaming? You look ridiculous when you're caught. Mind your own business, Loren muttered, sitting up properly. Hermione, flushed from apparating with Professor Flitwick earlier, chattered on. Why weren't you at the Quidditch pitch? I saw Professor Black chasing a flying car on a motorbike with dozens of brooms after them. Dozens of onlookers. Loren smirked. If Professor McGonagall hears about it, our new Professor Black will be in detention. She's too busy. She's probably grading Animagus exam papers, Hermione said lightly. 234. The spring of 1993 is here. Professor McGonagall was taking longer to grade their papers than they'd expected. She hadn't announced the results, either in Transfiguration class or in the Transfiguration Club. On the first weekend in February, Lee Jordan, ice skating on the Black Lake, fell through a thin patch of ice and was hauled ashore by the giant squid's tentacles. The mishap marked the beginning of the thaw and the unofficial arrival of spring in 1993. The giant squid's reappearance after months under the ice drew cheers from the students. All the snow had melted, and without the white blanket, the castle's stone walls warmed again under the sun. making the change in the weather unmistakable. It was twilight in the third greenhouse. Loren, Harry, and Ron had just finished checking the mandrakes. They took off their gloves, put their gardener aprons and earmuffs back in the tool shed, leaving only their boots on. The three stretched out their legs and lounged by the greenhouse door, basking in the last of the sun while they waited for Hermione. "I asked Neville to stay and help, but he forgot and ran off as soon as class finished," Ron said, tipping his head so the golden light hit his face. "He's probably too anxious," Harry said, swinging his feet so the hard soles of his boots thudded against the stone. "Professor McGonagall's test results haven't been announced for months. Neville can barely sleep. It seems he's anxious about more than just the test results," Loren said, lying back and squinting to savor the afterglow. Even with his eyes closed, he could feel the sun's warm red wash. "What do you mean? Tell us." "Only say half a sentence, will you?" Harry and Ron pressed for more, but Loren wouldn't say, and after a few more questions, they gave up. The three of them lay back in a row, the faint fermenting smell from the ventilation in the third greenhouse around them, looking like three sun-dried sardines. "What do you think Hermione's been doing recently? We never seem to find her unless she's in class," Harry asked, shifting for comfort. "Ha!" Ron said approvingly. "She must be secretly studying to be an animagus. When McGonagall announces the results and Hermione comes first, she'll stand there and tell us she can already transform into a squirrel or a little lion." Loren drifted off into fanciful images, oblivious to anything else. "Really?" Hermione's voice, dry and warning, cut above them. A moment later, the sunset was blocked by a long-haired figure. Harry and Ron sat bolt upright and both pointed at Loren on the right. "It wasn't us. He said it," they blurted together. Loren blinked in surprise. Hermione snorted, hauled Loren to his feet, and theatrically patted grass and soil off his robes. The motion looked vigorous, but the force was all absorbed by the fabric. Loren felt nothing. Standing close, he caught her scent. A girl's faint sweat, and under it, with subtlety, the clean, medicinal trace of essence of murtlap. She had tried to hide it, but he could still smell it. Loren edged nearer, curious to see if she had any freshly healed wounds or other signs of recent work. Harry had gone outside to lock the greenhouse, the job Professor Sprout had trusted him with, and he had a key for it. By the time he returned, Loren's robes were clean. After changing out of their gardening boots, the four of them set off toward the castle. The sun had slipped behind the distant hills, leaving a long band of orange fading to crimson across the sky, the same color as the Gryffindor sashes. Their lengthened shadows leapt and danced behind them like small tongues of fire. Ron kept teasing, smiling. "Honestly, Hermione, don't be like Percy, prefect, head boy, top of every class. Tom Riddle sounded like that too. It's awful. Listening to you, those things sound like bad qualities. If Percy heard his own brother talk like that, he'd be hurt," Hermione said defensively, though she was in a good mood. She gave Loren a playful pat on the robes. When he gave her an exaggerated look of reproach, she put on a mock serious face. "Tell me about your work. Professor Sprout has set you on mandrakes. Are your ears okay?" "They're growing out of childhood fast. They're getting sulky," Ron said, kicking a pebble. "Not all of them. The early ones are already rebelling. They're moody. If one of them sees someone without earmuffs, that person will get a lesson they won't forget." They walked on, found the same pebble again, and Harry gave it another kick. Hermione's strong boot sent it the farthest. "That's good. If they get spots and heal, we can repot them into larger pots and wait until they mature," she said. "Then we can pull the mandrakes and boil them in a pot to make soup," Loren offered, testing her, then realized he meant it as a joke. Hermione froze. Harry's face twisted. "You know, that sounds a bit cruel," Harry said, unsettled. Later yet, something almost as cruel was narrowly averted. On February 13th, the night before Valentine's Day, Loren and the others were finishing dinner and enjoying pudding. "Don't say I didn't warn you. Don't hang out by the lake tomorrow. Don't sneak into bushes in the courtyard, and don't go poking around in unused classrooms," Seamus said, flat. "Why?" Harry asked as he swallowed his last forkful. "Because you never know which couples will be hiding there making out," Loren said, and the table chuckled. "You think they should be bolder?" Sirius Black appeared from the side and sat down between Harry and Ron. He'd been around for almost a month now. Between Quidditch, flying cars, and motorcycles, they'd gotten to know him. Though faint red veins flecked his eyes, his pupils were sharp and his expression lively. Loren wasn't surprised. His nightmares from the illusion had kept him from sleep, but not completely. "What's that, Siri?" Ron started, then corrected himself. "Professor Black." "Look at this. It should be from your Professor Lockhart," Sirius said, producing a beautifully wrapped envelope. Harry and Ron peered over and immediately recognized the sigil on the flap. "Dwarf Choir?" Sirius tilted his head and handed the note around, while fishing a curved tin flask from his pocket and taking a sip. Noticing Loren's stare, he laughed and explained, "A potion Madame Pomfrey helped dilute. Wiggenweld mixed with something else. I use it to refresh myself when I'm not sleeping properly. I still haven't adapted to being a professor." Hermione's smile had faded. The pudding no longer tasted like anything to her. She watched Loren. When she saw he looked untroubled, she let out a small, involuntary sigh. In her head, she wondered when Dumbledore would look into the test results. Loren seemed fine, and Black was all right, too. Harry and Ron finished reading. "Lockhart's been preparing this since Halloween," Harry said slowly. "He hired 12 dwarfs to go around delivering valentines. They'll read the love letters out loud and sing them with music. In front of everyone," Ron added. The whole idea was declared outrageous. Around the table, the students fell silent to digest it. "Lockhart's already paid a deposit. The dwarfs wrote to ask if I wanted to continue the arrangement. I think the return address he gave was the Dark Arts office," Sirius said. "Do you want to add other services?" Sirius asked with a wave. 12 dwarfs are hardly enough." "No need," Harry spluttered, coughing as the pudding clung embarrassingly in his throat. Ron, Seamus, and the others piled on, adamant that they didn't want the service. After a little persuasion, Sirius looked reluctant but still entertained the idea. "None of you are in love. Lockhart has been voted the most popular. There must be some redeeming quality to his plan, right?" Harry had no gift for prophecy, but he had a sinking premonition. It was strong enough to persuade Sirius to drop the scheme. In March, a number of mandrakes held a noisy, vigorous party in the third greenhouse, which delighted Professor Sprout. After herbology that day, she told the students who stayed behind, "When they move to larger pots, we'll know they're mature. Then we can bring all those poor people in the hospital back to life." Still, Harry and Ron had to continue their usual work, checking growth and recording it. By past habit, Loren stayed to help. Hermione usually slipped away for a while. This time, there was a difference. Not long after Professor Sprout left, an owl flew in and landed on Hermione's shoulder. She stroked the bird and drew a tiny note from its leg. "It's from Professor McGonagall," she said. Her face tightened with worry. "She wants me in her office immediately." "Then go," Loren said. Puzzled at Hermione's expression, she looked as if she expected Professor Snape, not McGonagall. "I?" Hermione faltered. She couldn't say she had an appointment with Professor Flitwick at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Going to McGonagall would mean breaking it. In her panic, she kept glancing toward the tree line. Loren noticed. If she were actually seeing Hagrid, she wouldn't be so anxious. Hagrid never fussed about appointments. That made Loren understand. Hermione was torn between two obligations. "Send McGonagall an apology by owl and say you'll be a little late," Loren suggested. "You go to the forest. I'll go to McGonagall and explain. If it's important, I can help." "You're the best," Hermione breathed. Loren stood at McGonagall's office door, knocked, and pushed it open when he heard the reply. Unusually, Professor McGonagall wasn't hunched over marking sheets or paperwork. She was reading a newspaper, though her face showed displeasure at whatever she'd seen. When she folded the paper down, Loren couldn't help peering at the headline. The front page of the Daily Prophet had a photo of Hogwarts in the center, and ghostly images of Dumbledore and a gigantic basilisk floating on either side. The headline read, "Basilisk, you know who." It wasn't even a hint. It practically named Dumbledore as you know who. Loren craned his neck and tiptoed closer, so obvious in his snooping that McGonagall's temples throbbed. She snatched a stack of documents and placed them atop the paper, hiding the headline. "I haven't finished reading yet," she said, but Loren only muttered under his breath. McGonagall took a long breath. Why are you here? Where is Miss Granger? Hermione couldn't get away, Loren said smoothly. She was worried your matter was urgent, Professor, so she sent me. He sat down at the chair before the desk, adopting Hermione's lesson posture, straight-backed and attentive, and went on with exaggerated earnestness. Is there anything I can do to help, Professor? Professor McGonagall, unusually tired, simply wanted to send him away. She opened a drawer. You've pulled out 4 notices and handed them to him. The candidates who passed the Animagus test have been selected, she said crisply. You are to post these lists in the common rooms. 235. Related reports. Coming out of Professor McGonagall's office, Loren walked back toward the Gryffindor common room. Professor McGonagall had given him 4 notices, but he didn't plan on posting them in every house. The entrance to Gryffindor Tower was on the 8th floor. If he climbed slowly, he'd run into members of other houses anyway. Before heading up, he decided to take a quick look at the parchment in his hand. The Animagus exam pass list was arranged by year. At the top were the second years who had passed. Only 3. Loren raised an eyebrow when he read the names. It wasn't surprising that he and Hermione had passed. His transfiguration was well ahead of his peers, and Hermione had spent so much time in the hospital wing over the break that she'd practically memorized every relevant theory. Others hadn't been so diligent. Harry and Ron barely finished their holiday homework, let alone proper revision. Neville, by contrast, must have spent the entire holiday preparing. His result was well-deserved. On the 3rd floor, he met Luna and Ginny and handed the Ravenclaw notice to Luna. On the 4th floor, he ran into Blaise Zabini and passed the Slytherin notice to him. When Blaise unfolded the paper, his expression was a study in disbelief. How could this be? All the second years are Gryffindor, and 2 of them are. He stopped, not daring to say Muggle in front of Loren, and walked off, looking thoroughly put out. Loren blinked in mild surprise. He didn't understand how a black British student could be such a pure-blood loyalist. Didn't Blaise ever question his own background? He hadn't met any Hufflepuffs by the 7th floor. Just as he was considering whether he'd have to go out of his way to the Hufflepuff common room, he bumped into Hannah coming down from the 8th. "Hello, Loren," she sang. "You've come at just the right time." Loren handed her a copy. "The Animagus pass list is out. Could you post this on your common room notice board?" "Of course." Hannah opened the parchment. When she saw Neville's name, a bright smile lit her face, and she went downstairs on light feet. Even Loren could see how happy she was. Meanwhile, Hermione was practicing apparition near the edge of the Forbidden Forest, and not having much luck. With a bang, she appeared, pale and coughing violently. The spatial compression of apparition had left her breathless and dizzy, and she had landed far from the old wooden hoop they'd been aiming for. Professor Flitwick's brow creased. Had her skill really slipped in only a few days? "Miss Granger, you looked anxious from the start. Is something the matter?" he asked in his high, worried voice. Hermione, still catching her breath, explained apologetically. "I'm sorry, Professor. I received a note from Professor McGonagall, and I asked Loren to go to her for me. I couldn't stop thinking about it." Remember the 3 Ds of apparition: destination, determination, deliberation, Flitwick reminded her gently. "You didn't have your 3 Ds today. Let's end the session here." "I'm sorry, Professor." Hermione's cheeks flushed as she looked down at her shoes. Flitwick patted her shoulder and tried to reassure her. "You've progressed so fast that I worry a little. Next time, tell me beforehand if something is wrong. If you can't concentrate, you might splinch." He even used a flying charm to take her back to the castle and dropped her off early. Hermione went first to McGonagall's office. Once she knew everything was all right there, she climbed out of the portrait hole into the Gryffindor common room in much lighter spirits. Fred and George were gathered at the notice board, crowded by 7 or 8 other students. Hermione's heart fluttered. She had forgotten to ask McGonagall about her own results. She squeezed through and found Neville jammed at the front, giggling and lost in his own happiness. George declared triumphantly, "Look, except for Ron, all the Weasleys passed." "Alas," Fred sighed, tacking on his usual jab, "perhaps our mother forgot to give him a brain when she was pregnant with him." Hermione scanned the room for Harry and Ron. If they'd been here, she could imagine the Weasley brothers bickering going on all night. Angelina, noticing Hermione blocked by the crowd, called out, "Don't push. Wait until there are fewer people. You and Loren are both on the list." Hermione paused, joy rising, and stepped back. She found Loren in a corner with Seamus and Dean, all three bent over a copy of the Daily Prophet, faces dark with indignation. "What are you looking at?" Hermione asked. Loren spread the newspaper on the small wooden table. The headline was scathing. "Basilisk? You know who?" A blurred photograph of a basilisk and Dumbledore took up half the page. Hermione's temper flared as she read the article. The report by Rita Skeeter attacked Albus Dumbledore. It dredged up his family history. Born in Godric's Hollow in 1881, a student at Hogwarts in Gryffindor from 1892 to 1899, a brilliant transfiguration teacher who also dabbled in the dark arts. Skeeter wrote of a tragic childhood, a sister named Ariana, driven mad after uncontrolled magic when she was 6, a father, Percival, who attacked the boys he blamed and was imprisoned, an older brother, Aberforth, who supposedly said Albus cared little for his family and was obsessed with fame and arcane research. The piece implied Dumbledore had been dangerously close to Grindelwald at one time and asked what other secrets might lie in that relationship. Then the article turned to the recent events at Hogwarts. Skeeter quoted a nameless student who described a school living in fear after the basilisk attacks, speculated that the Chamber of Secrets dated to Salazar Slytherin, and suggested that the attacks had only resumed after Dumbledore became headmaster. The Ministry's investigation, Skeeter claimed, had never seen a complete basilisk corpse, only an old snakeskin and some scraps that the school submitted. She even queried Newt Scamander's response, pointing to his book to suggest no basilisk had been seen in England for centuries. Worse, Skeeter repeated Ministry sources saying the school had linked the attack to you-know-who, and that Dumbledore had alleged the attacks targeted half-bloods and Muggleborns. Skeeter sniffed that a victim's cat, a staff member's pet, didn't fit that pattern. She reported that Vincent Crabbe had been transferred to St. Mungo's, allegedly controlled by a dark object and without recollection of his actions. Finally, Skeeter suggested Dumbledore's reforms at Hogwarts were an attempt to sideline the school board and the Ministry, and hinted he might have ambitions beyond his office. The article finished in Skeeter's florid script. "Our special reporter, Rita Skeeter, will continue to report for you." How dare she? Hermione slapped the paper so hard the little table rattled. She's trying to make Dumbledore look like a dark wizard, painting his childhood as some kind of origin for evil, implying he staged the attacks for power. Seamus and Dean read through the article again, anger and confusion on their faces. At first, they only saw the slander. As they read more, the breadth of Skeeter's insinuations became clear. Loren pulled Hermione down onto the nearby sofa and said quietly, "Don't worry, people who trust Dumbledore won't be swayed by this, and people who don't aren't worth worrying about." He had the same clarity Hermione felt. The article wasn't about truth so much as jockeying for power. When Voldemort comes back for real, the same people making noise now will be the first to crawl back to Dumbledore, Loren said. Hermione's fists remained clenched. Dean, having read more carefully, looked up in disbelief. Dumbledore is the chief warlock of the Wizengamot. He's connected to powerful people. How can a reporter get away with slandering him like this? Because someone is backing her, Loren said with a faint sigh. Dumbledore's been around so long. People who knew the truth back then are dead or out of the picture. Most of what she's dug up probably came from Ministry records. "Minister Fudge?" Hermione said, remembering her confusion in the Chamber of Secrets. "He respects Dumbledore. He wouldn't approve this." Loren shrugged. "Maybe not him, but there are other toad-like cronies." The image that sprang to Hermione's mind was immediate and sharp. Dolores Umbridge? Loren tapped the paragraph about Vincent Crabbe and spoke with a hint of mockery. "And don't forget the pure-blood families. This is groundwork, laying out a narrative to absolve certain people." "They can absolve them?" Seamus burst out. "If Colin and Justin hadn't gotten away, they might have been killed." "Why not?" Dean muttered darkly. "Even Death Eaters used to escape judgment back then." 236. Frightening Dream. The Animagus class roster and the Daily Prophet's slanted report landed like depth charges among the students. The Great Hall buzzed with argument at every long table during dinner. The Prophet should have done this ages ago. Dumbledore's the one pulling the strings. He's aiming for the ministry, Marcus Flint shouted down the Slytherin table. My dad says they'll push for a new education decree. Just you wait. Dumbledore will be out of Hogwarts before long. We should have a proper pureblood headmaster, someone else added. A decent man wouldn't let Muggleborns into the school. Draco listened without expression, more amused than angry. If Marcus were really brave, he wouldn't need to lower his voice so only a few nearby could hear. Goyle sat on Draco's right. The semester had been underway for months, and Goyle had settled into life without Crabbe. He'd found a new companion, Pike Selwyn, another pureblood, another mediocre student eager to curry favor with Malfoy, and had slid almost seamlessly into Crabbe's old role. Pike was thinner than Crabbe, smaller than most of his peers, but eager all the same. Draco didn't mind the new clique. He couldn't always be aloof. Sometimes letting Goyle and Selwyn make a few loud pro-pureblood remarks made life easier. Remember Vincent? Theodore Knott bent toward them. Knott, a quiet pureblood acquaintance of Draco's, didn't need to flatter anyone. His potions marks were good, and he kept to himself, but he could be sharp about blood politics. I heard something about him. If it's news, spit it out, Draco said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. I read my father's letters to my uncle who works at Ilvermorny, Knott said, lowering his voice. They got a transfer application from a student named Pierre Crabbe. Goyle scratched his head. He's a crab. What has that got to do with Vincent? Selwyn grinned. Not stupid, Goyle. It's obviously Vincent under a new name. Rumors at dinner never stayed at one table. By the time the candles were lowered, the story had leapt from house to house. Back in the Gryffindor common room, Seamus told Harry what he'd heard, and the rest gathered quickly. The ministry really let him walk? Harry clenched his fists, rage bubbling up until he punched the little armchair Ron was sitting on. They nearly killed us with the basilisk, and Crabbe gets away. No punishment? Maybe it wasn't so simple, Loren murmured, and when the others looked at him blankly, he explained, think about the Malfoy donations to the ministry. The Crabbe family would have paid handsomely too. St. Mungo's might have been paid off. Healers bribed. They'd buy favorable coverage in the Prophet and pay officials to bury the trial. Hermione listened, and as Loren spoke, she felt something inside shift. The world, which had seemed straightforward, gained darker, more complicated layers. She could see faintly how money and influence bent things. Loren wanted to tell her more. She was kinder and more trusting than most, and Loren thought she should know the ugly side of how people really behaved. Despicable rich purebloods, Seamus spat. I'm pureblood, Ron protested. We don't have money like the Crabs. Weasleys aren't crabs. Harry's temper faded with a long breath. Sorry, Ron. When I think about the chamber and how close we came, he trailed off. Loren reached out and flicked Hermione's ear. She gasped and, in irritation, flicked him back. One thing led to another, and they were roughly wrestling on the sofa until Ron waved the Prophet at them like a white flag. Stop it. Look at this. They sat up, red-faced and muttering excuses to themselves. Ron tapped the article. Rita Skeeter's going to keep reporting. That's worrying, Loren said. She's good at taking small facts and stitching them together so people imagine connections that aren't there. He pointed to the paragraphs about Dumbledore's childhood and a separate note about his correspondence with famous witches and wizards. Put two unrelated things next to each other, and people infer a cause. She uses half-truths to create a bigger story. Don't talk to her, Loren said flatly. Anything we say will be turned into copy. Harry frowned. Is she really that dangerous? She can't get everything. She's already been through Ministry archives and residents of Godric's Hollow. Where else could she dig? Ron asked. Besides the teachers, the only people who had contact with the chamber and the basilisk were the four of us. If she wants a story, she'll come to us. Hermione's mind filled with lessons she'd read just that month about propaganda, mass psychology, and the power of the press. Those abstract ideas suddenly had weight. Don't mention the chamber, the basilisk, the invisibility cloak, disillusionment charms, anything, Loren warned. This is a magical world. Who knows what enchantments could let her overhear us? Do we really have to go that far? Harry asked. He thought of the times Sirius had spoken about the basilisk. The four others fixed him with stern looks, and he nodded. That night, Harry lay awake, staring at the four-poster. He relived the day again and again and felt oddly distant from his friends. Their thoughts no longer fit as neatly with his. Sleep finally came in fits, and somewhere between dozing and waking, he slipped into a dream that felt too vivid to be only that. He found himself lodged against a warm chest, like a baby in someone's arms. The adults around him were taller and richly dressed, sleeves embroidered with family crests he didn't recognize. Gray mist and spray blurred his view. He realized, with a kind of dream logic, that they were flying over the sea. Gradually, the scene shifted, and they were clambering up a mountain through clouds to a high castle. Two enormous statues flanked the main gate, and a crest on the stone platform showed four creatures. A great bird, a horned serpent, a small gnome-like figure, and at the bottom a muscular cat-like wampus. Blackness swamped his sight. When the dream returned, he heard a man's voice, timid, fearful, yet eager for approval. "It's done, Master. Finally." Light showed an enclosed, dimly lit room. A short, thick man stood before someone, presenting a bottle. The bottle was the focus. The perspective zoomed down until the world narrowed to glass and liquid. Harry's dream mind stirred. He realized with a lurch that the short, nervous man was Crabbe, eyes glassy and blank as if someone else controlled him. The voice above was hoarse and cold. "Finally done. My decision was right. Wormtail, though you are weak, you have been a useful servant. This body will be enough, a simple, fragile host, while I gather the ingredients needed for a full return." "Yes, Master," Wormtail stammered. "Unicorn blood and basilisk venom, mixed as you commanded." The view plunged into the potion. Harry felt himself swirl and boil with the brew. Time passed in a nauseous blur until the bubbling stopped. He saw a ceiling. A pair of rough hands wrapped him in a swaddling cloth and lifted him. The realization hit with sick clarity. He was a baby now, made, not born. Wormtail's fear showed plainly. "I've put some food in the bottle, Master. If you're hungry, I can feed you." A high, cold voice that made the room chill answered lazily, "Humph." Wormtail fed the infant obediently, then set it down. Gathering what courage he had, he whispered, "Master, how long shall we remain here?" "Not sure. Months, perhaps more," the voice said. "Don't worry, Wormtail. Next school year, I will send you back to Hogwarts." Wormtail knelt and wept openly, pleading, "No, please, Master, don't send me back to Hogwarts." The cold voice promise came without warmth. "Do not fear. Lord Voldemort does not send loyal servants to their deaths. I will plan this carefully." Harry woke with a gasp, heart pounding, sweat cooling on his skin. He lay in the dark, the dream's images clinging to him like cobwebs. A baby in a bottle, a voice that called itself Master, the names that could not be mistaken. 2:37, delivery. Harry lay stiff on the bed, panting as if he'd been running. He had woken from a very vivid dream, his hands clamped over his face. Beneath his fingers, the lightning bolt scar burned hot, as though someone had pressed a white-hot wire onto his skin. Bright morning light poured into the Gryffindor common room, and Harry, having slept poorly the night before, felt it sting his eyes. He rubbed his face hard, as if trying to scrub his head clear. The pressure steadied his breathing, and with the little ache that came with rubbing, his thoughts grew sharper. "Let me see." Loren sat opposite him, a thick book in one hand, flipping pages with the other until the parchment rustled. Hermione and Loren sat in a row. Ron was beside Harry. All of them watched him with worried faces. "Here it is." Loren slammed the book flat on the table. "From your description, that emblem has to be the Ilvermorny crest." Harry lowered his hands and leaned forward to study the illustration. A huge bird like an eagle, a horned serpent, a wampus, and a small gnome-like creature arranged on a shield. "Yeah, that's it," he said. He pointed at the four animals, his head full of questions. "But I've never seen this before. I'd only ever heard the name Ilvermorny. Why would I dream about it?" "Not just that, Harry." Hermione bent her head and read the caption under the picture. "Ilvermorny sits on Mount Greylock, protected by powerful wards and only visible in certain mists. The main entrance is guarded by marble statues of its founders, Isolde Sayre and James Stewart. The four creatures stand for the four houses. It fits too well to be a normal dream, Loren added. This matches real things. But none of this was common knowledge to me. Harry's voice wavered. Loren's expression turned grave. Harry, don't you see? That wasn't a dream. Not a dream. Real. Harry pressed his palms back against his face and rubbed hard, trying to banish the unease. He clawed for the images of the night before. Everything had felt unbearably real. Wormtail breaking out of Azkaban, his control of Crabbe, a potion of unicorn blood, and basilisk venom forming a baby body for Lord Voldemort. The memory chilled Harry as if ice had slid into his stomach, and a sharp twinge from his scar interrupted him. He looked up, resolve coming back to his features. I have to tell Dumbledore. No? Now? Ron grabbed his arm and dropped his voice. How would you even explain this to Dumbledore, Harry? You're seeing things through Voldemort's eyes. People will make a mess out of it. Remember your parcel-tongue business? And Colin and Justin are still in the hospital wing. Are we going to hide it? Hermione shot back. Ron was only trying to protect Harry from gossip, but sometimes friends drag you into hiding because they're scared for you. Loren pursed his lips and smiled a little. I think Headmaster Dumbledore will keep this between us. He's trustworthy, isn't he? He paused, more serious now. Speaking of which, Harry, what about the occlumency you were supposed to practice over the holidays? Have you had any progress? Harry scratched his head awkwardly. Well, half an hour later they stood in front of the headmaster's office. Silver instruments spun and puffed thin trails of smoke. Portraits of former headmasters and headmistresses lined the walls, peering down as if listening. Dumbledore sat at his desk in a gray-white robe and half-moon spectacles. The 4 students waited across from him. Harry did his best to describe everything he had seen and heard. Hermione and Dumbledore listened with intent concentration. Loren and Ron alternately eyed the revolving tray of buttered biscuits. When Harry finished, Dumbledore asked the same question Loren had. Harry, how are you getting on with occlumency? Professor, why are you so concerned about occlumency? Hermione, who had practiced with Loren over the break, was curious. Harry echoed the question. Sirius said occlumency is a very obscure magic, used to stop outsiders getting into your mind. Dumbledore considered them slowly and carefully, so I thought a little practice would be appropriate. Didn't lose either. I landed a good few blows. McGonagall did not look convinced. Severus Snape was never the sort to show scars. You two are professors now. Are you going to keep fighting like irresponsible students? Set an example. Sirius waved a hand. Don't worry, I've arranged a public duel during the next dueling class. McGonagall's headache deepened. She folded her hands and steered the conversation away. Sirius, I called you for something more important. I want to know how you 3, James, you and Peter, managed to complete the animagus transformation on your own. You did so without guidance, and you all succeeded? McGonagall, herself an accomplished animagus and a transfiguration master, could not imagine how 3 students could practice and become perfected animagi without a teacher. Sirius's face lit with the memory. He was suddenly a boy again, proud and eager. He took a sip from a vial he carried, then launched into the story. You know Remus, he said. He's had his problems since we were young. He tried to hide it, but we found out in our 2nd year. He had to spend the full moon nights in the Shrieking Shack, and Dumbledore arranged that for him. We wanted to help. And we thought we could learn to become animagi, so we could accompany him during his transformations, James added from the corner of Sirius's memory. Sirius laughed, then swore under his breath. He tried to keep it secret from us. Poor acting. At first we thought being animals would keep him safe, that we could control things if we were there. But it was messy at first. We had to learn a lot. Controlling your heartbeat, managing the animal urges, keeping your mind while your body changes. It took us 3 years to get a grip on it. It wasn't simple. McGonagall listened, dissecting every detail. I am aware of Lupin's condition, she said. But I must know, how did you all succeed? You and James were talented. Perhaps you could manage. But Peter? His grades were average. How did he make it? Sirius looked faintly confused. He was the slowest, yes, but he still did it. We had to be methodical, holding mandrakes in our mouths, brewing potions during full moons, testing things out on stormy nights. For the next hour, McGonagall questioned them about what they did, what they observed. the precise steps they took. She asked about rituals, ingredients, the measures that required care. As the tale unfolded, her expression sharpened. Then she fixed Sirius with a hard look. "You mean you watched a werewolf transform several times?" she asked quietly, suddenly piecing the final detail together. Animagus is a special branch of human transfiguration, and it obeys the same basic principles, Professor McGonagall said. It must be precise and real. From what you told me about observing werewolf transformations, you have an exceptional grasp of human transfiguration. Every stage of a werewolf's change is seared into your memories, she continued. You understand how the body alters, how it shifts between human and beast. You also have a deep insight into how bestial thoughts can intrude on the human mind. The werewolf condition has strengthened your inner resistance so you will not be overwhelmed by savagery. With her command of the subject, McGonagall quickly distilled the student's experience into 2 teaching points. 2 essentials, she said. 1. The detailed process of physical transformation, clear and exact enough for students to learn how to convert between human and beast. 2. Mental training to fortify a student's resolve and prevent bestial thought from taking control. Sirius, admiring her analysis, couldn't help but voice a practical objection. "Professor, this isn't something we can make standard practice. We can't just have a werewolf transform over and over in front of a class." "Would Remus Lupin agree to that?" McGonagall asked, though she knew it would be a delicate request. "I doubt he'd want his most vulnerable side displayed to so many students." Sirius rejected the idea outright. He had reconnected with Remus recently and knew how hard life had been for him. Asking him to perform would be humiliating. He'd been trying, in fact, to figure out a way to get Lupin Wolfsbane potion as a gift he could accept with dignity. McGonagall thought briefly about other options and dismissed them as well. It would be irresponsible to involve a muggle, and a wizard werewolf would likely find that offensive. Sirius shifted to a more constructive suggestion. "We can at least solve part of the problem. With 2 animagi here at school, students could observe repeated transformations and better understand the human-to-beast changes. At least that would reduce the risk of someone ending up with scales or horns." McGonagall's mouth thinned. "No, it can't be guaranteed. There was an element of luck in your successful learning." Sirius frowned. "Wasn't it because of Remus?" "Yes, but not entirely." McGonagall's gaze sharpened. "Wolf, rat, dog, stag. Do you see? The forms you took are all of a similar type." Sirius caught on. "They have fur, they run on 4 legs, they breathe with lungs." "Exactly," McGonagall said. "There are many shared characteristics. Your limbs still become limbs, not wings or fins. Your internal organs change into similar organs. You won't suddenly grow gills or anything entirely incompatible. Your animagus forms happen to be the sort of animal closest to a wolf." She looked at him seriously. "You were very, very lucky." Instead of feeling praised, Sirius felt a cold jolt of fear. He patted his chest as if to check his heart. If any of us had turned into something else, an owl or a fish like a bass, that could have been catastrophic. "We must be careful after the animagus class begins," he added. "If some young wizard tries to imitate what we've done and goes wrong, it could be dangerous." "You are right," McGonagall agreed. "Other young wizards won't necessarily be so fortunate." Sirius brightened a little. "Every student in the animagus class will be selected for talent in transfiguration. If we guide them carefully, step by step, the chances are good." McGonagall let out a sigh. It would be helpful to have animagi of many different animals for the students to observe. Sirius laughed. "There are only 8 registered animagi right now, and most of the rest are already prominent. Why would they volunteer to be teaching assistants?" "I will write to them," McGonagall replied. "The more types the students can see, the better their chances." A knock interrupted them. Outside, in the castle courtyard, Neville crouched by a blade of grass, watching a slug inch along its underside. He withdrew his toad, Lifu, who shot out his tongue and swallowed the slug in one gulp. Lunch solved, Neville tucked Lifu back into his pocket and turned his attention to a small beetle on another blade. This was no ordinary beetle. It spread its wings and flew in a straight, purposeful line toward the 8th floor. It hovered outside a window, then slipped through the crack into the Gryffindor common room. There were only a few people there. The small beetle landed and immediately spotted the red hair of a Weasley and the lightning-shaped scar of the boy who lived. They were sitting by the window, deep in discussion. "No, I want to learn occlumency too." Ron slammed a newspaper on the table in indignation. Apparently, everyone but him had been practicing occlumency over the holidays. Harry clutched his head, worried. Hermione stared off, lost in thought, and Loren barely lifted an eyelid. "I can put you in touch with Professor Snape," Loren offered. "He'll be happy to teach you." Ron deflated. I don't really want to learn that magic." The beetle crawled onto Ron's trousers and up under his collar, settling against the back of his neck. Rita Skeeter, reporter extraordinaire and animagus, had taken the form of a beetle, as she often did. Her antennae twitched. She had already begun drafting the angle of her next scoop. At that moment, Loren's magic-sensing vision stuttered. The colors of the room seemed to shift. The magical auras around his friends pulsed and then snapped back. He had learned to sense magic, and such passive triggers were rare. Something special had happened. Hermione murmured, "Did you notice? Dumbledore didn't seem surprised when he heard Pettigrew had escaped. It was as if he already knew." "And he said nothing about Voldemort's new body, nor about Crabbe's transfer to Ilvermorny," Ron added. "How did Pettigrew escape Azkaban? They knew he was an animagus. The Ministry must have countermeasures." Loren blinked, then closed his eyes and tapped his forehead. When he opened them, the room had lost its colors. Shapes were outlines and lines. The scene had been stripped of distraction. Hidden paths and tiny movements showed up like tracks in snow. He fixed his attention on Ron as though looking through him. "Found you," he said. Before Ron could ask what he meant, Loren flicked Ron's collar. The beetle flew off and landed on the carpet. Loren drew his wand and barked, "Petrificus Talus!" The beetle's shiny shell went gray and slack, and it collapsed onto the carpet. Ron gaped. Harry and Hermione stared. "What was that for?" Hermione asked. Loren deactivated his vision, picked up a box of snacks from the table, and scooped the inert beetle into it. "I think this impolite guest is the famous Rita Skeeter," he said, shaking the box for emphasis. With a small tap of his wand, the box shimmered and became a glass bottle. Inside lay a beetle with a pallid shell, still and motionless. They remembered what had happened the first day of term, when Loren had exposed Scabbers. The three of them looked at the beetle now, as at a captured spy. Ron's face crumpled into a mix of outrage and exasperation. "Why is it always me? First Scabbers, now this." "You must be popular with small animals," Harry said with a laugh. "Did she hear everything?" Hermione asked Loren quickly. "Probably," he replied. "Now how shall we entertain our reporter guest?" A second knock sounded, louder this time, at the door of the Transfiguration professor's office. "Come in," called Professor McGonagall. Loren, Hermione, Harry, and Ron walked in. Ron was still shaking the glass bottle as if he'd been personally wronged by a bug. "Harry?" someone said. "Sirius?" "What are you doing here?" Harry blurted. "What are you doing here?" Sirius replied, bemused. "Cough, Mr. Potter. At school you should address him as Professor Black," McGonagall said sharply, covering the greeting. "Of course, Professor Black," Harry corrected, brightening. Sirius watched them with amusement. "Mr. Weasley, stop tormenting that little beetle. It looks like it's foaming at the mouth." McGonagall pressed her temples with one hand and felt a headache coming on. "Mr. Morgan, Miss Granger, what can I do for you?" "My computer had a small problem, so I'm late. Then I'll add an extra chapter this weekend. 239, Course Selection." On Monday morning, as the younger students passed the bulletin board, they noticed two new postings. One of them climbed up and read them aloud. "Notice, this Wednesday at 8 p.m., Great Hall, the Dueling Club will hold a session. Instructors, Severus Snape and Sirius Black. Notice, this Friday at 3 p.m., Transfiguration Classroom, the Animagus class will officially begin. Please arrive on time if you have passed the examination. The first meeting will be non-practical. All students interested in Animagus are welcome to observe." The two announcements caused an immediate buzz. "Professor Snape and Professor Black? Two instructors?" someone exclaimed. "Will there be a duel demonstration? Who do you think will win?" Lee Jordan's voice carried above the rest, and suddenly everyone was arguing over the duel. The Animagus notice was nearly forgotten. "Exciting. Merlin's beard. I can't wait. Who will win? It has to be Black. I've been waiting to see someone give that old bat a thrashing. It's not so simple. They were classmates, but Sirius missed 10 years, while Snape had 10 more years to practice. The crowd around the board grew loud and rowdy. Nearby, Loren and a few others heard the commotion. Loren sat cross-legged on the common room sofa, a class schedule in hand, tracing listings with his finger and muttering, "Choose, don't choose." Ron slung an arm around Harry's shoulders. "Don't worry," he said. "Sirius might not be as good at magic as that old bat, but he's got to be tougher." He mimed throwing a punch. Sirius will give him a good hit on the nose, and Snape won't be able to cast. Harry grinned at the thought. Hermione, exasperated, tapped both their heads with her wand. "Can you two stop being silly? Think about something serious, like whether that beetle of a reporter is going to be handed over to the Ministry." "Ow!" Ron yelled, covering his head. Professor McGonagall said not to worry. She'll deal with it. Yeah, Harry said, covering his head and nodding. "But don't you want to know how Professor McGonagall will handle it? Aren't you at all curious?" Hermione pressed. "Curious," Harry admitted, "but we're more curious about Sirius and that old bat's duel right now." "Exactly," Ron agreed. "We should go remind Sirius he can't afford to duel that old bat with spells. He should go in close and fight." Harry couldn't sit still. He grabbed Ron and bolted out of the common room. "You too," Hermione scolded. Loren, calm as ever, set down his quill and said, "Relax. That beetle has already been turned over to Professor McGonagall. We should trust her." Hermione still looked worried. "I'm afraid Professor McGonagall will hand her to the Ministry and she'll get off in a few days. After all, they couldn't even keep Pettigrew." "Dumbledore knows what he's doing. He'll consider everything," Loren said, circling items on his schedule. "Care of magical creatures, divination, arithmancy." Hermione craned closer to read. "What's that?" "Third-year electives." "The notice should come out before the Easter holidays," Loren explained. There was still a week to go, and Hermione wasn't surprised that Loren had some inside knowledge. He was the sort of student who could find things out, whether from an upperclassman, someone in another house, or even a professor. Hermione had grown used to his oddities. Care of magical creatures, divination, arithmancy, ancient runes, muggle studies, she read aloud, frowning. "Can we only pick 3 courses?" "Theoretically, yes. 3 at most. Choosing more tends to cause timetable clashes. A lot of electives run at the same time." Loren shrugged. "Though there's no strict, written rule, no professor's going to flatly refuse you if you ask." Hope lit up in Hermione's eyes. Word of the second-year course choices spread fast. Within a day, everyone in the year was buzzing about it. For many, the decision felt important, a choice that might shape their future. Small groups clustered across the castle comparing schedules and asking upperclassmen for tips, which classes had the least homework, which were easiest to pass. The older students smiled mysteriously and offered nothing concrete. They'd been through the same thing and enjoyed watching the younger ones panic. Only Percy Weasley was different. He actually wanted to help. That evening, in the Gryffindor common room, Percy was surrounded by anxious second years. He cleared his throat theatrically and, trying on an air of authority, adopted a mock Professor McGonagall tone. "Regarding course selection, this depends on where you want to go. You must plan your future now. Divination and arithmancy can give you insight into future events. Divination relies more on talent. Arithmancy is more rigorous. It depends on what you want." Hermione's eyes brightened. She leaned to Loren and whispered, "What kind of talent does divination need?" "Prophetic ability, perhaps," Loren whispered back. "Can anyone learn it?" "It's offered to students and we're allowed to choose, so I suppose so," Loren said uncertainly. Professor Trelawney's predictions seemed unreliable most of the time, except for the rare, genuine prophecy, but the class itself rarely involved much that was predictable. Homework and exams were odd at best. Loren still wanted to try it. "Whether I have talent or not, I'm choosing it." "Me too," Hermione said happily. Loren pursed his lips and stayed silent. Percy continued, quoting Professor Trelawney at one point, "Divination is the most profound of all the magical arts." The Weasley twins couldn't help themselves. Fred and George burst into laughter, clutching their sides. They understood the unwritten rules of divination, how, in practice, the class worked, and found Percy's solemn delivery comical. Percy shot them a disapproving look, imitating Snape's expression, but Fred managed to say with mock seriousness, "Percy's right. You definitely won't regret choosing divination." George laughed louder. Even Fred couldn't keep from smiling. After easing a doubled-over George away, Fred laughed all the way up the stairs. "What about the other courses?" Loren asked, raising his hand to help Percy along. Percy appreciated the assist. "Next, ancient runes. It's complex and difficult, good if you're interested in ancient magic and history. Otherwise, it'll be a headache," Percy said. Neville hesitantly asked, "Which is harder, ancient runes or arithmancy?" "If you ask me, ancient runes," Percy replied, getting into his stride. Next, Muggle studies. Some people sneer at Muggle studies, but I think wizards should understand non-magical society thoroughly, especially if you plan to work closely with Muggles. Percy went on, listing ministry departments that dealt with Muggle interactions: the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes and its Muggle Liaison Committee, the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad, the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office, and ended with, "Care of magical creatures is very enjoyable. A lot of outdoor work and meeting fascinating magical creatures." After the Q&A, Percy wandered off to square things with the twins. The group dispersed, reforming into small circles of discussion. Seamus and Dean lounged on a sofa, looking utterly relaxed. "Have you chosen your courses yet?" someone asked. "Yes," Seamus drawled. Neville asked how. Seamus replied sagely, "I might not know what to choose, but I know what not to choose." Neville looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "Did you hear Percy? Ancient runes and arithmancy are hard." Seamus patted Neville on the shoulder. "Don't make life difficult. Picking the easy classes is the prudent move." Ron and Harry brightened at that approach. The lazy, take-it-easy vibe spread. Loren's eyes flickered. He recognized the danger. Hermione, sensing the contagion, pulled him away. "Have you decided?" Loren looked at her and said, "Didn't you see? Care of magical creatures, divination, arithmancy." "Why those?" "I've already started runes, and I'm not interested in Muggle studies." "Oh," Hermione said thoughtfully. Wednesday evening, the Great Hall had been cleared, and a square, gilded platform had been set up in the center. The ceiling turned its velvety black again, and hundreds of magical candles floated above. Students had heard about Snape and Black's mutual dislike and expected sparks, so they arrived early and pushed forward, eager to get front-row spots. Ron was on tiptoe, craning to see. "Will anyone get hurt? I don't see Madame Pomfrey." "Don't worry," Harry said, grinning. "Sirius will probably give him a good beating, but not seriously hurt him." Loren said nothing, standing next to Hermione, his eyes bright with anticipation. Hermione scolded him quietly. "They're professors. Professors should set an example," she added. "Besides, Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick are here. They won't let things get out of hand." Her point dampened some of Loren's scheming excitement. Finally, Sirius and Snape strode onto the platform together. Sirius wore a long black trench coat. His face looked thinner than Harry remembered, his hair short and tidy. He smiled with easy confidence. Faint bloodshot lines rimmed his eyes, but he seemed alert and energetic. Snape was in his usual black robes, pale and expressionless, and somehow seemed to chill the air around him. At that moment, someone should have stepped forward to introduce the dueling lesson, explain the rules, and offer pointers, as had been done when other departments held dueling demonstrations. But Snape did not move to take on the role of commentator. He stood there coldly. Sirius, likewise, refused to show any weakness by speaking first. So the two instructors of the dueling club faced the assembled students on the stage and said nothing. 240. Black versus Snape. Professor Flitwick chuckled softly and turned to Professor McGonagall. "I knew it." Professor McGonagall sighed, climbed onto the stage, passed between Snape and Sirius Black, and tapped her wand to her throat. "Attention, please stay quiet." Her clear, ringing voice cut through the chatter in the Great Hall. Once she had the students' attention, she continued. "Unlike the previous dueling lessons, which each had their own focus, today's demonstration will be between Professor Severus Snape of Potions and Professor Sirius Black of Defense Against the Dark Arts. Their duel will reflect the style of mainstream dueling." The students murmured among themselves. "What does that mean?" Dean, a student from a Muggle family, asked in confusion. "Isn't transfiguration or herbology the usual dueling style?" Ron watched the stage without looking away. Put it this way, the average wizard's transfiguration can't compare to Professor McGonagall's, and most people can't use transfiguration in a duel. And those dangerous plants, using them against an enemy might get you hurt first. Is that so? Neville muttered. He'd been taken with Professor Sprout's last demonstration and had considered pursuing that kind of combat. Hearing Ron's opinion made him hesitate. Loren patted his round shoulder encouragingly. If you want to learn, ask Professor Sprout. Isn't the point of dueling class to expose us to different styles? Be confident, Neville. You've got dueling skill. Learn whatever you want. Neville smiled gratefully and nodded. Professor McGonagall resumed. Everyone excels at different charms and develops different combat styles. I hope you'll take from today's demonstration an understanding of real dueling and something useful. Now, please welcome our two instructing professors. She lifted the booming charm and stepped back. Snape, no longer hesitating, stepped forward to take charge. Sirius Black bristled with indignation. He'd been ready to go first, and the murmurs that had hung in the air vanished the moment Snape stepped up. A tense silence settled over the hall. Snape's gaze swept the room. Dueling, this word has been dressed up by a stable and peaceful era into a kind of polished etiquette, he said flatly. Many of you do not realize that centuries ago, dueling meant two opponents fighting until only one remained. His voice carried no inflection. The cruelty of the idea sent a chill through the candlelight. The students shivered. Loren's eyes gleamed. This would be a high-level duel, he thought. Hermione leaned toward Harry and whispered, I'm not so sure now. Maybe Professor McGonagall should have asked Madame Pomfrey. Harry and Ron exchanged worried looks about Sirius. Snape continued in a low tone that every student heard clearly. You are here to learn psychological warfare and the subtle application of charms. Because you won't see dripping blood or exposed bone here, many of you will not believe such battles happen. I do not expect you to fully grasp the cold art of seizing a moment to deliver a fatal blow, or the elegance of using rhythm to toy with an opponent. His blunt, bloody words drained some faces of color. Quick-minded students thought of the basilisk, the ministry's denial of you-know-who, and the hidden dangers outside school. The atmosphere grew serious. Everyone realized this demonstration would be nothing like the ones before. They settled in, listening closely. Flitwick leaned to McGonagall and murmured, Minerva, isn't this extreme? Is it necessary? McGonagall watched the stage, firm. Severus understands proportion. They need to see a real duel. Snape's mouth curved with a hint of sarcasm. But you must learn one thing. How to save your life when it matters. I believe Professor Black will give you a fine example. The Slytherin table erupted at that, thrilled. Sirius's eyes went red with temper. He wanted to shut Snape up, but words failed him. He stepped forward and shot back. Who wins and who loses is still unknown. They completed the formalities, bowed, stepped back 7 paces, turned and held their wands upright. The students unconsciously held their breath. Close the distance, someone whispered. Close quarters rapid attack, another replied. Loren blinked and opened his magical sight. Snape's magic shimmered cool, dark green with an edge of coldness. Sirius's was a bright red. Snape's magic was stronger. Sirius's talent was undeniable, but 10 years in Azkaban had dulled his speed, his charms, and his instincts. Snape stood alert, refusing to take the initiative. Going first can be an advantage, but it can also be a weakness. He expected his opponent to tire. Sirius remembered discussion of tactics with Harry, close quarters, entangled combat, rapid attacks. He'd inherited dueling talent from James and knew the right counters, but his rusted reflexes and reduced casting power meant a prolonged exchange would favor Snape. If he traded charms with Severus, he would be dragged into Snape's rhythm, toyed with until he slipped up and one blow finished him. He had to press hard now. With nothing left to lose, Sirius launched the duel with a full-force Expelliarmus, not to disarm, but to close the gap. Snape's expression barely moved. He deflected the charm the instant it reached him and returned one that landed a body length in front of Sirius, denying him the chance to close. Once the tempo had been set, there was no slowing. Sirius pushed forward, desperate to break Snape's defense and get in close. Snape remained unnervingly calm, as if he had known Sirius's plan from the start. He deflected attack after attack and returned charms of his own to keep Sirius at bay. They avoided lethal spells and aimed away from the students. Defenses, offenses, and Expelliarmus spells whistled and cracked through the air in a relentless barrage, charm after charm like a sudden summer downpour. The magic light was dazzling. The students watched enthralled. Harry, Ron, and the others clenched their fists. Every now and then, a stray spell flew off the stage, and McGonagall and Flitwick worked together to cushion or redirect it, causing gasps and impressed murmurs. The duel slipped into a stalemate. "Get close. Close the distance," Ron urged. "They can't," Loren said softly. "It looks like Sirius is attacking aggressively, but both are attacking. There's no chance to slip past Snape's defenses." Sirius's breaths grew ragged. His furious assault had achieved nothing, and maintaining that rate of casting was exhausting. He decided to slow and regroup. As his frequency dropped, Snape, firmly planted across from him, felt the pressure ease. A small smile creased Snape's mouth. This was exactly what he had promised the students. Use rhythm, toy with the enemy, seize the opening, deliver the fatal blow. He had more to give. Now it was time to play. A binding charm zipped through the crossfire and landed at Sirius's feet with a dull snap. Sweat beaded on Sirius's brow as a chill ran through him. If he let up, Snape's charms would split his defenses and the roles would reverse. Forced into keeping up the high tempo, Sirius felt himself slipping. Snape could sustain this indefinitely. Sirius could not. The students began to pick up signs. Both were exchanging charms, but their faces told different stories. Snape's expression was composed, almost playful. Black's face was a mask of concentration and sweat. "Professor Snape is going to win," someone whispered. "I thought Professor Black would. He was so fast at the start," another countered. The spells that slipped through Sirius's defenses became more frequent. He couldn't keep this up. Desperation brought a wild thought, and he acted on it. "Pesky Pixie Pesternomi." Among the many spells, a weird yellow-tinged charm flew from Sirius's wand. It was hardly powerful, but the instant Snape saw it, something in him exploded. Long-buried memories surfaced, being hung upside down in front of others, mocked and humiliated in his student days. James Potter and Sirius Black had been there then, the same faces, the same ridicule. Rage flared hot and poisonous. "How dare you? How dare you?" Snape's wand shook in his hand. He could not abide that spell being thrown at him. Seizing the momentary slack, Sirius transformed into his animagus form, an immense black dog, and charged, relying on an animal's burst of speed to close the distance while taking several incoming charms. Snape's mind raced. If he struck from this angle, he could slice the animal in two. This was Hogwarts. He could cast a counter-charm quickly. Madame Pomfrey was ready. Nothing irreversible would have to happen. It would show the students what true dueling could be. Blood and flesh would teach them. The temptation to go that far flickered through him. But he didn't. Instead, a rapid, practiced stream of control, charms flew from his wand, faster than anything he had used in the earlier exchange. Petrificus Totalis snapped first, then a barrage of knockback jinxes. The black dog's lunge failed. Petrified and then struck again and again, it was slammed backward by the force of the jinxes and flew into the great hall wall with a dull, sickening thud. "Sirius Black!" Harry cried, rushing with Ron to the wall. McGonagall and Flitwick exchanged a quick, controlled glance. They had seen the spells that struck Sirius and knew they weren't fatal. Snape stayed on the stage for a moment, breathing fast, anger slowly ebbing as cold air cleared his lungs. He hadn't cast Sectum Sempra, he didn't know why, but had instinctively chosen restraints rather than a bleeding curse. Coming back to himself, he nodded once to the students and walked off the stage without a word. "He won!" some Slytherins shouted. "Long live Professor Snape!" The Slytherin table roared in enthusiastic approval.